Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the Luffy fanfics. Back with amazing fanfiction. This is the series of What if Luffy becomes badass captain? Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. The battleship of Commodore Nice was in absolute and utter chaos. Nell could hardly see their hand in front of their face from the smoke on the deck, and the sounds that surrounded them gave no hint to what might have been happening. Nell could only hope that the direction that they were running would lead them to someone, whether they were an enemy they had to fight or a subordinate they could assist. There was only one person they truly hoped not to run into. Somewhere off to their left, they heard the telltale sounds of haunting laughter and violin. Nell shivered. Scratch that, there were two people they absolutely didn't want to meet. The noise of battle grew closer as they ran. Nell held their rifle in front of them, knowing full well that a sniper's weapon was little help when the sniper using it was near blinded with very little hockey to speak of. And even then, another part of their brain reminded them, that was with normal opponents. The Straw Hats were a completely different breed, nearly half of which bullets had no effect on. Nell once again cursed their Commodore for picking a fight that they knew he couldn't win. They'd thought that he'd see reason when they reminded him that fights with any emperor were major world events, but that just made him more bloodthirsty. No matter how much he preached about justice, Nell was sure that the main reason he antagonized the Straw Hats was a desire for fame. The smoke darkening around them was the only warning they got. A roll of thunder rattled Nell's teeth as they narrowly dodged a bolt of lightning, diving to the side. Their shoulders slammed against the deck, making them lose their weapon and nearly dislocating the joint. They quickly began fumbling in the smog for their rifle, desperate for the semblance of safety it gave them in the chaos. A moment later, their hand hit cold metal and they breathed a small sigh of relief. The Straw Hats weren't known for wanton killing, but it was always better when you thought you could put up a good fight. The deck thudded with footsteps right next to Nell. They stood with a shock, pulling their rifle to point directly forward. They held their breath, sheer will the only thing keeping their finger off the trigger. The smoke coalesced in front of them, forming a tall, pale shape. Nell braced themselves to come face to face with a skeleton, taking a pointless step back that only made them stumble. They glanced away for a scant second, heart in their throat. Looking back up, they realized who the person before them was. Not the musical skeleton that they had expected, nor any other pirate. It was the Commodore himself. Sheet. He looked over at them the instant they began lowering their rifle, face splitting into a wicked smile. He grabbed Nell by the forearm, pulling them towards him and pointing up. "Captain Nell, perfect timing. Here, I have a target for you," he said. Nell followed his finger up through the smoke. Sure enough, they spotted him through the haze. A small figure balancing on the top sail of the main mast, nearly 200 feet in the air. Checking through the scope allowed them to identify him: God Usopp, sniper of the Straw Hat Pirates and apparently the cause of the miasma of smoke that had yet to lift from the deck. Nell saw him fire a smoke bomb, expertly missing the spider web of rigging on the way down and narrowly avoiding stumbling off the mast from the recoil. Catching himself in an instant, they watched him wave at passing figure of Blackleg Sanji, who was flying above the smoke for a moment before descending back into the cloud. Blackleg, face stoic and glowering, nodded at God's wave. Nell brought their gun down, decision made. "Sir, I can't fire on him," they said. His face twisted. "Of course you can, Captain. I never would have kept you if I thought you couldn't make shots like this. Your lack of hockey doesn't mean you're completely useless," he tried to encourage them. It grated on their nerves. "No, sir. I won't fire on him," they said. Thunder rolled overhead again, the clouds opening up to start pouring rain. Nell was soaked through within moments. Commodore Nice's expression darkened, his sharp, handsome features contorting into something grim and foreboding. "You realize a refusal to follow orders is mutiny, Captain. Care to explain yourself?" His voice was low, difficult to hear over the sounds of the battle still raging. Nell steeled themselves, thinking only of their subordinates that were put in unnecessary danger for an asshole's desire for notoriety. "Because, Commodore, any shot to him would kill him, whether I hit in a vital area or not. The mast is too high." "And why is that a problem? If you recall, he's a pirate with a bounty. Dead or alive, Captain." Nice was tall and he loomed, staring Nell down as if his gaze alone could force them to obey. "I'm aware of his bounty, Commodore. I am only being pragmatic. If we kill God Usopp, the entire ship will be sunk in the rest of the crew's rage. As we are now, we stand getting out of this fight with minimal casualties." They knew he wasn't going to like that. His grip on their arm became painfully tight. "Captain, the only good pirate is a dead pirate. Now you will shoot down that criminal and I will watch his broken body hit the deck that he destroyed, or I will have you hanged for insubordination." He pulled Nell in close, nearly picking them up with the force of it. "How dare you imply that I would lose to Strawhat Luffy," he said, his voice dangerously soft. His breath was hot and stinking in Nell's face, rainwater dripping off his nose into their eyes. The sounds of fighting around them were drowned out by the ringing in their ears. "I refuse," Nell whispered, resolve cracking under the pressure. He growled in their face, grip squeezing their arm until they could feel it snap. Nell swallowed a scream as they were dropped. "Fine," he bit out. "I'll do it myself." Pulling Nell's rifle out of their lax grip, he held it one-handed to stare through the scope, easily finding his target with the rain dissipating most of the smoke. "This'll be more fun anyway." Commodore Nice pointed his empty hand at God Usopp, fingers curled in an imitation of the gun in his other hand, and Nell was at once reminded of his devil fruit. Their breath froze in their lungs. They cursed their oversight. "Sir, please, you do that and you kill us all." Nell tried to beg, clutching their broken arm. "I do this, Captain, and I'm one step closer to Admiralty," he said with a grin. "You do well to remember that." A concentrated blast of bright orange energy left his fingertip and Nell prayed that it didn't hit its mark. Time began to slow as Nell cast their gaze around to try to find some way out of the shitshow that was going to unfold. As they did, they realized that they could see the entire deck of the ship for the first time since the whole mess began. There were groaning and unconscious, or worse, Marines scattered everywhere, with some of the straw hats scattered throughout. They could clearly see Blackleg Sanji, Demon Hunter Zoro, and Strawhat Luffy as whirlwinds on deck, the captain grinning wide and laughing loud, clearly having the time of his life as he took down Marine after Marine. Most of the rest of the pirate crew were zipping in and out of fights, gouts of flame, lightning strikes, and disembodied limbs making the scene hard to comprehend. Head aching with a coming migraine, they abandoned the hope of help to instead watch whether or not the entire ship was going to be doomed to the sea floor. Nell's stare followed the blast of power as it narrowly avoided fizzling out on ropes and beams. Every obstacle it scraped by made Nell's heart skip beats in their chest. They begged whatever deity may have been listening. But God's back was turned. The blast hit God Usopp square between the shoulder blades. Nell couldn't have aimed better if they had tried. They tried not to be bitter about that, it wasn't the time. Nell's heart sunk into their stomach as they watched God Usopp stop, stumble, and fall. They let out a shout, hoping that someone on his crew might have heard and looked over. He seemed to fall for an eternity, twisting in the air as he bounced off rigging that did little to slow him. He hit the deck like an earthquake, the slam of his back on the wood finally alerting one of his crew. "Oi, Usopp, you shithead. What did you go and do, Trip?" Blackleg yelled over, glancing at the body on the deck before he realized what had happened. God was still alive, that much was apparent, mostly because while he was splayed on the deck, he was anything but still. He was seizing and convulsing, limbs and skull hammering into the wood hard enough that Nell could hear it where they were. Blackleg was off like a shot, bounding over entire battles in order to skid to a stop by his fallen crewmate. "Usopp!" Blackleg shouted, kneeling over him to cradle his head. "Chopper, we need you. Usopp's hurt." Nell could hear the Commodore cackling above them. They couldn't help but feel a grim satisfaction knowing that he'd be destroyed along with the rest of them. Everybody knew not to mess with Emperor Straw Hat's crew. There was nothing that they could do but wait for judgment as they watched their death sentence unfold. Of all things, a large, antlered reindeer came bounding over at Blackleg's cry, shifting to a smaller form as he reached God and Blackleg. With the practiced eye of a medical officer, the deer assessed God, checking his eyes, his head, his pulse. His seizure continued throughout. The more God shook, the more frantic the reindeer seemed. Finally, seemingly abandoning trying to find a cause, he and Blackleg rolled God onto his side, pillowing his head in Blackleg's lap. And the Commodore had still not stopped laughing. Nell finally glanced up to see him, nearly freezing in despair when they realized why. He had dropped their rifle, but not his hand. He was pointing at the back of the little reindeer. Nell saw red. Wasn't it enough to doom them once? Nell began to vibrate with anger, the pain in their broken arm nearly disappearing in the heat of their rage. With a shout, they leapt at the Commodore, shoving his arm up and away, making the next shot of power fizzle out as it was fired directly into the mizzenmast. The shock on his face was almost worth the feeling of his hand closing around their throat. But whatever he was going to say as he lifted them off their feet was drowned out. "Luffy," the reindeer cried out, voice young and cracking, echoing across the quieting battleship. The fighting stopped. The rain stopped. Time stopped. A blast of Conqueror's hockey so powerful it made the Commodore stumble and drop them rolled across the deck. Nell could see every other still conscious Marine drop like stones as it hit them. They were sure that the only thing that had spared them was the burn in their lungs and their pain in their arms. They almost wished they could have been knocked out, spared from witnessing the end. Strawhat Luffy was on the Commodore in an instant, stepping over Nell like they were a bug to grasp him by the collar, lifting him off his feet. Nell once again tried not to feel satisfied about that, however the continued coughing made it difficult to resist. Nell stared at the scene above them. Straw Hat was no longer the jovial brawler that treated battle like a game, content with being in the presence of his crew, laughing and clapping his way through droves of opponents like they were training dummies. He wasn't smiling. Wasn't frowning. His face was carved from stone, cold and impassive, staring at the Commodore hanging from his outstretched and stretching arm. The continued waves of haki that emanated from him, making it hard for Nell to breathe, were obviously affecting the Commodore too. He shuddered in Straw Hat's grip, kicking the air as his mouth gaped like a hooked fish. Movement on the edge of their vision made Nell glance to the side, where they realized that they were totally surrounded. Any Straw Hat pirates that weren't dealing with the still seizing god were circling Straw Hat and the Commodore. None of them gave Nell a second glance. Straw Hat's head tilted, giving Nell the impression of a curious puppy. "What did you do to Usopp?" he said. His question was quiet and insistent. They got the feeling that it would not be asked again. "I'm not telling you anything, pirate scum," he spit. Nell had to hand it to the Commodore. They were sure if they were in his shoes, they wouldn't be talking back. But then again, they wouldn't have gotten themselves in his shoes in the first place. "Brook," Straw Hat said, not once reacting to the Commodore's struggles. "He shot him with something, Captain." "Not a bullet, some kind of devil fruit power," Soul King Brook said, from where he was standing over Nell. They prayed he continued to ignore them. "I saw the bolt leave his hand, though I have no eyes to see." They couldn't help but glance into his face at that. The sight of his grinning skull and vacant sockets made Nell shiver. His face was as expressive as his captain's. "Maybe if we kill him, it'll reverse the effects. Like the people in Dressrosa," said Devil Child Robin. She sounded curious, as if she was suggesting an option for repairing a broken toy. A sword appeared at the Commodore's neck, a trickle of blood running down his throat. "Worth a shot," said Demon Hunter Zoro. All of the Commodore's movement ceased. He held as still as possible while continuing to dangle. They could see his neck straining as he tried to lean away from the blade. Nell finally found their voice again. "Wait, please," they choked out through labored breaths. All eyes except Straw Hat's were on them. They once again found themselves wishing that they'd been knocked out by the haki immediately. The weight of the pirates' gazes were heavy on their back, making them glad they were still kneeling. Their marine sensibilities protested at kneeling for pirates, their survival instinct shut that up quickly. "Why?" Straw Hat said. It wasn't a question. "If you kill the Commodore your crewmate might never recover," they ground out. "Then we knock him out," Cat Burglar Nami said, tapping her staff onto the top of the Commodore's head. He flinched. "No," they squawked. Someone came to crouch in front of them and their vision was flooded with the massive form of Knight of the Sea Jimbei. "Marine," he started, "I can understand your loyalty to your commander, but we are attempting to help our crewmate. If we do not get answers on how to do that soon, there will be consequences." He didn't threaten or cajole or even raise his voice. He simply stated a fact. Nell could feel the gravity of his words, pressing down on them as readily as the haki still emanating. They met his gaze steadily. "It's not, loyalty. I've seen his power." They paused to breathe deep, "and knocking him out will make the change permanent. It's happened before." "What change?" Knight asked. Nell swallowed. "Memory. The Commodore can erase people's memory." They glanced over to the still shuddering god. "The seizures are a side effect that should subside. If knocking him out makes the change permanent, how exactly do we reverse it?" Devil Child asked. The look on her face made Nell immediately glad they had a good answer. "The memories come back with time, as long as the Commodore isn't knocked unconscious." "How much time are we talking here?" Cyborg Frankie chimed in as Devil Child nodded. "It depends on how much time was taken. Usually a couple days, maybe a couple weeks if it was a lot of years." "So what does that mean for us?" Demon Hunter asked, sheathing his sword, but not without making another less than shallow slice in his neck. "It means we're leaving," Straw Hat said, dropping the Commodore who fell like a sack of potatoes from his grip. "Nami, can you get us back here?" "If I need to, yes." "Frankie, make sure they can't run away." He wasn't even looking at the Commodore anymore, refocused on God, Blackleg, and the little reindeer doctor. Cyborg nodded wordlessly. Aiming his massive, robotic hands to the sails, he let loose a pillar of flame that quickly ate through the fabric. Not wasting a second, he then dove over the side of the ship. A moment later the deck shuddered with impact. Nell watched in shock as the rest of the Straw Hats dispersed from around them, quickly returning to God, whose seizures were finally slowing. They couldn't swallow the faint hope that was crawling its way up their throat at their departure. They tried to keep a blank face as Knight stood and walked away without a second glance at them. They didn't think any of the crew would try to retaliate against them, but it was always better to be careful when dealing with pirates. Nell chanced a look at the Commodore, telling themselves that it was to check on their superior after a confrontation with an emperor. It wasn't. The sight of him was staggering. Commodore Nice lay where he fell, eyes vacant and shining, mouth hanging open. His limbs were twisted under him, his neck at an odd angle. His uniform and hair, normally so fastidiously well kept, were soaked and unkempt, the collar of his jacket dyed red with the blood still oozing from his neck wounds. If it wasn't for the wheezing breath that they could hear, Nell would have thought that he'd died of pure fright. Though there was no love lost for the glory-chasing fool, they couldn't help but pity him and the bed he made for himself. A figure at the edge of their vision made them whip their head around, the movement jarring their broken arm. They cringed at the pain, their vision going black around the edges for a moment. Once their eyes cleared, they realized what had startled them. Most of the straw hats left Nell where they were kneeling, not caring about them one way or another once their questions were answered, in order to check on their crewmate. That was, all except one. Devil Child Nico Robin stood to the side, her arms crossed over her chest, gaze intent on Nell. Behind her, Nell could see the rest of the crew preparing to leave, Knight having picked up God to cradle him like a child in his giant arms as he twitched. But still Devil Child stayed. They tried to avoid meeting her eyes, scared of what they'd see in them. They prayed that she was just being diligent, making sure the last Marine standing, or kneeling, didn't try anything. They were wrong. "Luffy," she called, not taking her eyes off Nell. "I have an idea about something that may help us." Their hope for survival disintegrated like the sails on the ship. "Yeah, Robin?" Straw Hat sounded distracted, calling over from his perch on the back of Knight. "I think it might be useful if we take our little Marine friend with us," she said, walking towards them. Nell was certain they weren't keeping the fear off their face anymore. "Ugh, are you sure? The last time we took a hostage, it was a total shit show." Cat Burglar chimed in. "Not a hostage this time. Merely a person with experience with this particular power. You heard them, they've seen his abilities before. I'm sure they know stuff that they aren't telling us," Devil Child said. "And perhaps a little leverage can't hurt," she tacked on as she kneeled delicately in front of them. It was only the tattered remains of their pride that kept them from scooting away from her intense blue gaze. "You're sure this'll help Usopp?" asked Straw Hat. Nell held their breath. "Certain." "Okay." Straw Hat turned away, Nell's fate sealed. "Meet us on the Sunny." Captain," she said with a small smile. Nell couldn't help the tears that gathered in the corners of their eyes. They knew. They were no match for any Straw Hat pirate, barring maybe God himself, on their best day. As they were, kneeling under the weight of the slowly dissipating hockey, rifle gone and arm snapped, they were at her mercy. Nell knew it and so did Devil Child. She pet her head, eerily similar to her captain, as a tear began rolling down their face. There was no reason to keep up appearances anymore. "Don't cry, little Marine. Nothing is going to happen to you on our ship," she said, crossing her arms in front of her chest in an X. In the next moment, they felt a hand on their arm and their heart leapt in their chest. But instead of grabbing and pulling them to their feet and forward, the hand wrapped delicately around their wrist to support it. As they looked to see what pirate had approached without them noticing, they realized nobody had. They were still alone with Devil Child. The Devil Child with the devil fruit powers. The supporting arm was attached to Nell, sprouting out of the side of their ribs. They stared at it, bile rising in their throat, as another arm was formed on their side, swirling out of nothing in a flutter of flower petals, reaching to cradle their elbow. They could almost imagine the thin fingers curling around their neck, over the already forming bruises from the Commodore. The blatant show of power was near overwhelming. "Now come along, we don't want to keep the rest of the crew waiting," she said, standing in front of them. At least she didn't hold out her hand for them to grab. They don't think their pride could have taken it. They stood with a little difficulty. The two extra arms attached to their side had very little weight, but it was just enough to throw off their balance. Though they'd never admit it, the support did help with the pain of the break. Finally on their feet again, Nell used their free hand to swipe away any tears that had fallen in their despair. They stumbled a little on their first steps with the lopsided feeling of extra limbs, but quickly found the rhythm needed to walk. Following behind Devil Child, they saw where she was leading them, a hastily constructed gangplank connecting the battleship down to the brightly colored Thousand Sunny. Oddly enough, they were almost certain that it wasn't there when the pirates first boarded them. Nell paused at the beginning of the gangplank, staring at Devil Child's back as she walked down it. In their hesitation, they could see the movement on the deck below. The Reindeer Doctor, Knight Jimbei and God Usopp were already out of sight, the rest of the crew scattered around the inexplicably green main deck, all working toward setting sail away from the ship they stranded. Taking Nell away from everything they knew. Tears threatened to start forming again. You may want to get moving, we're shipping off very soon. They jumped, hearing Devil Child's voice from far too close to them. Glancing down, they realized that her voice was coming out of a new mouth that formed on one of the extra arms. They couldn't suppress a shiver as the mouth gave a close-lipped smile and disappeared off the arm in a burst of petals. Nell didn't think they would ever get used to devil fruit powers. Understanding the suggestion as the threat they knew it was, Nell took a deep breath, steeled themselves, and took their first step down the gangplank. It was a short walk that ended on, of all things, a grassy lawn. Devil Child was standing at the end, waiting for them to come down. Good. I was worried that you'd wait too long and fall off to drown in the sea below, she said, another one of those incomprehensible smiles on her face. They truly hoped that that wasn't their plan for getting rid of them when the time came. Drowning seemed painful. Now follow me, it's time for you to meet Chopper. You have some information that is very important to us. Usopp found himself drifting in and out of awareness to the smell of salt and disinfectant, and the feeling of a rocking ship. There was something on the edge of his thoughts, something important, something he should be thinking about. But every time he tried to grasp it, it slipped away like a fish in a stream. He felt like there was a dream that he should have been remembering, something sprawling and crazy and wonderful. But it rested in the back of his mind, pushing further in every time he drifted off again. He wasn't awake enough to be angry about it. Time passed in fits and starts, punctuated by noises that broke through his fugue. Footsteps, creaking floorboards, splashing waves, a distant violin. He wondered who in the village knew how to play. As far as he knew, the only instruments in the village were an old piano, an out-of-tune flute, and bagpipes that were only played at the funerals of assholes. Maybe there was a merchant ship in the port? As Usopp lay thinking, more of his senses came back to him. The second thing that he was aware of after noise was pain. It wasn't breath-catching or intense, but it made up for that fact by being absolutely everywhere. Every twitch, every shift, every breath ached like he'd just fallen off the northern cliff. He instantly wished he could have gone back to sleep. He tried to force himself back for a few moments, but the constant aching throb of pain pushed him farther and farther towards consciousness. Groaning and shifting in bed, Usopp tried to plumb his foggy memories for why he was in so much pain. Was there an accident? Did something happen? The last thing he could remember was going to bed at home after visiting Kaya. He supposed he could have gotten hurt running from the guards, but they never tried to actually aim to hurt. If it was them, he hoped Kaya hadn't seen. Taking a deep breath in, he tried to stretch, hoping that maybe it would help the pounding in his limbs and the ache in his back, but no. The instant Usopp tried to move any further than an inch, sharp, electric spasms started shooting their way down his neck into his legs. He jumped at the feeling, letting out a sharp cry that didn't help the pain in his head. Beside him, another voice yelped. In an instant, Usopp forgot about all of the pain in his body. He wasn't alone. There was somebody else in the room. What if he didn't know them? What if they were there to hurt him? What if they were the reason he was hurt? His eyes shot open, without thinking, and he tried to sit up and look towards his unexpected and possibly dangerous roommate, also without thinking. The moment he tried to twist his neck, however, he was reminded. He wasn't even able to look away from the ceiling before the pain in his neck tripled in intensity. Usopp went from moderately uncomfortable to feeling as though somebody stabbed him in the spine. His vision blacked and his limbs numbed with it. If he could have screamed, he would have, but the pain stole his breath away. Usopp could feel himself gasping like a fish, eyes clenched shut, mouth opening and closing as he prayed for the agony to fade. It was a few moments later that the lightning strike of pain turned into a dull ache and Usopp was able to think again. Of course, the first thing that came to his mind again was his roommate, but this time he was able to stop himself from making any rash, stupid decisions like moving. He opened his eyes first, one at a time, and when he didn't find some masked killer with a knife leaning over him, he decided it was safe enough to take his time in moving. Using one arm to leverage himself up, Usopp rolled to his side, leaving his head braced against the pillow and keeping his neck as still as physically possible. Though even the act of keeping it still sent little shocks down his back, they were mostly tame and definitely ignorable when he was faced with the reality of where he was and who he was with. Namely, Usopp had no FING clue. He was in an infirmary, that much was for sure. The wall of medications, skinny beds, and white linens gave that away instantly. But where was the question? Which became more of a question when Usopp was turned enough to glance out one of the circular windows. Windows that showed nothing but open sea and sky. No houses, no village, no land at all. He was on a ship, in a ship's infirmary. Why in the name of the sea was Usopp on a ship? Thoughts were racing through his head like arrows, fast and sharp and deadly. Usopp felt as though the instant he focused on one, he'd be hit by all the rest of them. Which would still happen anyway because he wasn't fast enough to outrun arrows and he definitely wasn't good enough to dodge. Usopp was gonna get killed by thought arrows because he couldn't even dodge things in his own DMN head. A high-pitched, embarrassing whine escaped Usopp as he finished rolling over. At some point, his eyes closed again, so he wrenched them open. Idly, he thought it was kinda unfair that his eyes didn't seem to want to stay open but he hadn't been able to go back to sleep. Like, what kinda logic was that? The person in the bed next to Usopp was sitting up, legs hanging off the side of the bed and staring at him. They were slightly paler than him, wearing all white and had bright blue hair, cut short except for 2 long braids at their temples, one of which they were twisting around a finger. The other arm was in a sling and Usopp instantly felt like an idiot. He was in an infirmary, why wouldn't there also be other people there? But wait, that once again raised the question of why the hell was he in a ship's infirmary and not home? Usopp's heart started racing. How are you feeling? The person asked, speaking with a slight accent that was definitely not Eastern, and Usopp's heart began to race more. Where am I? He asked, because I feel I must warn you, I have a crew of 5,000 deadly pirates that will be very concerned for my whereabouts if I've been kidnapped. You never know what pirates will do when they're threatened, and they're not very good at limiting collateral damage. They depend on me, you know, their great Captain Usopp, and with me gone they're just gonna be more and more agitated, and who knows what'll happen then. Usopp didn't think he breathed once while he lied. He was lucky he was lying down, his knees would be knocking together if he stood. He almost opened his stupid mouth again to keep talking when he realized the look on the stranger's face. Pure confusion? How much do you remember? They asked, a strange note in their voice. Why? Are you trying to gather information? Because I will tell you the great Captain Usopp would never give up a crew member. The bond between captain and crew is unbreakable and they put a hand up to stop him. Please, Usopp, just tell me the last thing you remember. I'm trying to help you. I promise you're in no danger here, they said, which still raised the question of where was here, but they were looking more annoyed, which was a bad thing for a possible kidnapper to be, so he swallowed the pack of further lies. The last thing? The last thing I remember is going home, he said, hoping that his desperate desire to be home came across enough. Okay. And where is home? Usopp's heart skipped a beat. Syrup Village, Gecko Islands, he said. And just in case he had to, East Blue. Damn it, they muttered. Why? Please, who are you and why am I here? And better yet, where is here? Usopp tried to keep the waver out of his voice. He didn't think he was successful. They looked at him like they were calculating something written on his forehead. The only other person that ever looked at him like that was Commodore. The comparison didn't make him feel better. My name is Nell, we're on a ship, and you're safe. You got hurt and forgot some stuff. You're here to get better while your memories come back, and I'm here to help you, they said. Usopp heard every gap in their statement, every slight pause that said they were considering what they could reveal. He wondered how much he forgot, if that was even true, and how he got hurt in the first place. That, at least, he knew was true. But he figured that Nell would not be forthcoming with more information. I just have one other question. How old are you? What? That caught him so off guard he forgot to lie. 16, why? Just making sure you knew, they lied, giving him a strained smile. Suddenly, Usopp could hear the sound of somebody walking along the deck towards the door. The footsteps were loud, clacking things of metal on wood, like the dockworkers with steel-tipped boots. Nell's head whipped around towards the door. Sheet, out of time. They looked back to him. The footsteps got louder. Listen to me, Usopp, you are safe here, I promise. It's going to be very weird and very confusing and probably very scary, but you are completely safe. I can guarantee that you will never be hurt on the ship. Their eyes were wide, darting past him to the door and back. What? What do you mean, why are you scared? The footsteps stopped. They gave him a small smile. I'm not you. The door opened without a sound. Nell stood at attention, splinted arm lifting to salute before they winced and let it fall back into the sling. Usopp almost started scrambling to face the door but thankfully remembered what happened the last time he tried to do that and settled for log-rolling over to his other side, terrified of not looking at the person that just walked in. That Nell was so obviously scared of. By the time he made it to his other side, the man in the room was leaning over a desk, setting something down that Usopp couldn't see. He was tall, not excessively but definitely taller than Usopp, with a broad back and unnecessarily long legs ending in heavy-looking steel-tipped boots. He dreaded what this man had in store for them. Nell promised that he was safe but they lied about some things, who's to say they weren't lying about that too? The man stood and turned quick, his long, blonde hair swaying with the movement. He had the weirdest eyebrow Usopp ever seen, some kind of ridiculous spiral, and the only thing that kept him from snorting with nervous laughter was that he also had a deep, seething scowl. People with scowls that deep were always angry at something and didn't care who they took that anger out on. It was part of the reason why Usopp gotten so good at running away. A scowl like that meant that someone was going to start throwing or hitting or screaming, and there was nothing that he could do but hide and wait for the storm to blow over. Usopp, once again, was glad that his position in bed meant that his shaking legs were hidden, though there was very little he could do about his face. The man took one glance at Usopp, their eyes meeting, and his face darkened. Usopp's heart sank to his stomach. "Sheet," the man said, with a hand pinching the bridge of his nose. "Well, alright, I guess this is how it's gonna be." He looked up at Nell, who was presumably still standing. "We need to talk." "Yes, they said before stopping with a hissed wince. "But before that," he said, looking back down at Usopp, "you need to eat. You've only been cleared for liquids for now, but Chopper figured he'd let you eat and wake up a bit before throwing you into the deep end of a doctor's appointment. So lunch today is a fish-based, nutrient-rich broth with orange juice to help with your sugars. Eat slowly and let someone know if you start to feel sick, don't just try to shove it down and deal with the nausea later." He was saying all this as he set up a tray table next to Usopp's bed with the promised food and utensils. He didn't meet Usopp's eyes again. Straightening up, he motioned his head towards the door and walked out, boots clicking on the wood. After a moment, Nell passed around the bed to follow him, giving Usopp a strained smile as they left. Left Usopp alone. In a strange room. On a strange ship. Hearing only snippets of a conversation obviously about him through a heavy wooden door. He strained his ears trying to hear, but every word he caught just jacked his heart rate up higher. "How long?" from the blonde. "Sure 16 days, from Nell. "Damn it, Captain, like this." "He know." "Sorry. Don't." "How?" "Almost. We're planning." "Okay, a date for him." Shithead, thought he. Usopp covered his ears with his pillow, trying to block out the rest of that conversation. Things were falling into place and he hated it. He must have been such an idiot to lie to these sailors, probably told them about some special treasure that he fully made up and then stupidly gave himself amnesia. So now the sailors were still looking for the treasure or weapon or whatever line Usopp fed them, but they thought they needed his help, so they couldn't do anything until his memory came back. Which meant that Usopp was up Sheets Creek when they did come back, because he was certain that whatever he said to Scary Eyebrow Man's captain was complete bullshit and whatever plans they had for 2 weeks from then would be for nothing. He would be lucky if he just got thrown overboard, seeing as he was having some other, even scarier thoughts about what kind of sailors would go treasure hunting. A small, quiet part of his wished his dad were there. He'd, for sure, know what to do. The footsteps started again and Usopp was only just able to get the pillow off his head before the door opened again. Nell immediately went back to their bed and Eyebrows stood in front of them with his hands on his hips. "Anyway, Chopper'll be in about a half hour, if something goes melons up before then and someone's not in here, just shout." He looked back down at where Usopp still laid, face finally partially morphing out of a scowl into angry confusion. "Why aren't you eating yet, you love fish stew?" It sounded more like a question to himself rather than to Usopp, so he elected to do something very rare, keep his mouth shut. Nell chimed in, he seemed like he was in pain when he moved earlier. Mostly in his neck. If Usopp could have turned his head, he would have given Nell the dirtiest look. Of course they sold him out. Goddamn, I'm an idiot. Here, he started leaning down towards Usopp, arms outstretched. "Oh no, I'm totally fine, completely fine, better than fine, in fact." Usopp started babbling, desperate to keep the man further than an arm's reach away. "I think I might go for a walk, maybe even a run if there's a place to run around here, or maybe I'll do a workout, gotta keep the muscles moving." Eyebrows was undeterred, rolling his eyes at Usopp's chatter before wrapping one arm around his back and the other hand behind his head. Usopp cringed and his mouth shut with a clack of teeth. He felt the strength in the arms around him, and braced himself for the pain that would come with being pushed and pulled and shoved around by another man annoyed at his very existence. Shockingly, as Eyebrows easily, so easily, beyond easily, dear sees what did this man eat, maneuvered Usopp to sit up with his back against the wall, he felt no pain. There were no JRKs on his injured neck, no squeezing of his skull to prove that he could, no harsh gripping of his shoulder as a warning. The arms around him were just gentle. Despite the man's continued grumbling, his grip remained steady and painless, if overly warm. "Hey, Marine, help me with the pillows," he said next to Usopp's ear. If Usopp were being more charitable towards Eyebrows, and less suspicious, he'd say it felt an awful lot like a hug. But it couldn't be. What sailor, probably pirate, would want to give Usopp a hug? Usopp? Usopp the liar, Usopp the useless, Usopp couldn't even keep his dad around or his mom alive. Why would anybody, much less someone so obviously strong, want to help him at all? Who was this guy? A moment passed. The touch was gone and Usopp was left propped against the headboard with pillows supporting him. He made himself not miss the warmth of the arms around him as eyebrows began to set up the lunch on a bed tray on his lap. There, that good, he looked at Usopp, still scowling. Usopp knew that if he tried opening his mouth again, there would be more bullshit spilling out, so he settled on a small, careful nod. Good. Okay. Eat lunch, 30 minutes, yell if you need anything. And you, he said, pointing at Nell, you eat too. I know you didn't eat breakfast because you thought it was poison or some shit, but here. He lifted a bowl of broth set up on the desk to his mouth to take an obvious sip. So eat. Nobody goes hungry on my DMN ship. The man walked towards the door as Usopp reeled. Halfway in the doorway, hinges creaking, he stopped. Oh, and the meat's just swordfish, by the way, he said as some kind of strange goodbye. And he was gone, his retreating footsteps echoing on the deck outside. Usopp waited until he couldn't hear him anymore. And then waited a little more. And then counted to 10. What the hell was that about, he said, just barely keeping himself from shouting. Weird and confusing doesn't even begin to cut it, Nell. That guy was terrifying, I thought he was gonna break me in half. And why did he know me? And what were you guys talking about and who's Chopper and why am I here and why are you here and where is here and what was that thing about the fish about? He only stopped talking to gasp in a deep breath. Nell was staring at the door when he spoke, waiting another moment to probably make sure nobody else would be interrupting. When they finally looked away, they met his gaze with a heavy exhale. That, they said, rounding the bed to sit at the desk, was Blackleg Sanji. He's the cook. As if that actually cleared anything up. Or answered any of his questions. But wait, no. Blackleg. They called him Blackleg. That's an epithet. Oh shit. He was on a pirate ship. A pirate ship filled with pirates. Pirates that he lied to. Pirates strong enough to have bounties. Pirates strong enough to make Nell scared. Nell? A marine. Also on a pirate ship. Sees he was so screwed. Oh, and he said that thing about the fish because there's rumors that he's a cannibal. Kidnapped by pirates and I still can't get away from my day job, thought Nell, simultaneously eating some of the best fish stew they'd ever had and fielding questions from God Usopp who had only just been able to stop himself from shaking. Except, he wasn't God Usopp right then. They needed to get used to that or risk slipping up and revealing something that Straw Hat didn't want revealed. Usopp wasn't God Usopp, he wasn't a Grand Line pirate, wasn't one of the best snipers in the New World, wasn't the man who shot down the flag of the world government. Hell, he wasn't even Sniper King yet. He was just a kid, scared and alone and very far from home. Nell could sympathize. So it was without complaint and with only a minor amount of grumbling that they answered all of his questions as much as they could. Slipping into the information protection mindset was as easy as slipping on a glove. They just wished they knew exactly what information needed protecting. But, of course, nobody told them anything because why would they? Where are we? Asked Usopp. On a ship, they answered automatically. Which ocean? An ocean you've never been to before. How did I get here? You've been traveling with these sailors for a while, you forgot. They glanced back. You should eat though, you've been unconscious for almost a day. He was staring at their back, meal almost forgotten in order to devote his concentration to every word they said, and didn't say. But that got his attention. A day, he screeched. What happened to me? He flinched as the outburst apparently jarred his injury. Nell winced at the volume. That was high enough to be a dog whistle. Leaving the soup where it sat for a moment, they turned fully to face him, his face open and confused and terrified. They figured he wouldn't be casting off the terror for a while. Once they had 2 minutes to do their calculations, they could say exactly how long of a while that would be, but it seemed 2 minutes weren't in the cards just yet. You had a fall. A bad fall. And you hit your head, they said slowly. The doctor on this ship treated you and is confident the memories will come back and you'll make a full recovery. You just need time. A pause. For a moment, Nell thought they heard footsteps on the deck above them but quickly dismissed it. They were on a ship, there was bound to be people everywhere. Terrifying, insanely strong pirates of an emperor's crew, but people. Mostly. Okay, he said, drawing out the second syllable as he looked away. His voice got quieter, smaller, it was hard to hear the next words. What happens then? Nell opened their mouth to ask what he meant, when they heard the footsteps again. Or, more accurately, hoof beats. Fast, frantic, intensifying hoof beats. Hoof beats that approached far too quickly to even say anything to Usopp before the door to the infirmary slammed open, revealing the small form of Tony Chopper, noted pirate doctor and walking, talking, shape-shifting reindeer. "What happened? I heard a scream. Reassuring Nell, right?" he said, fast enough that Nell could barely make out the last sentence. Now, it should be noted that of all the crew of the Straw Hat Pirates, Nell was the least afraid of Dr. Chopper. In fact, Nell would go far enough to say that they could almost see them liking him, if he wasn't part of a crew that was probably going to throw them overboard in a couple days. He was a diligent doctor who obviously cared about his patients, even when they weren't injured crewmates. He'd even seemed, or expertly faked seeming, genuinely concerned for them after he saw the bruising on their neck and went to the trouble of checking their larynx for damage. That was more than Nice's ship doctor had done the last time. And the fact that he was a reindeer? Truly, they'd been on the Grand Line long enough that barely even registered to them. Much weirder zones were a dime a dozen when you worked right next to the Beast Pirates' territory, and everyone knew the Surgeon of Death had a polar bear mink as a navigator. So Nell wasn't concerned about the doctor's sudden appearance for their own sake. Usopp's, however. Well, the instant the door slammed open, there was more shouting. Usopp tried to twist around to see Chopper but ended up just jerking his already injured neck again and falling back against his pillows with a bitten-off scream. Chopper, immediately assuming the worst, jumped up on his bed, narrowly avoiding the precarious soup tray, to check on his patient, like the good, concerned doctor that he was. Usopp's eyes were closed for the moment, presumably from the pain, as Chopper patted him for injuries and peppered him with questions that he didn't even try to answer. "What's wrong? What hurts? How long have you been in pain? Does it radiate anywhere? Do you feel any numbness in your hands or feet? How has your vision been? Have you had any sensitivity to light?" At the last question, he reached to Usopp's face, using one hoof to open an eye. Their gazes locked. Nell held their breath. Chopper gasped. "Oh yeah," said Chopper. "You don't." Usopp let out a soft sob. Not a loud sound, or an abrupt one. Just one single wheezing sob that seemed to escape his throat. Chopper scrambled away like he'd been burnt. Fast enough that he fell off the bed with a loud thump. Nell jumped at the fall, standing on instinct to help him, but before they could even take a step, he was crouched behind their legs, hiding just half his face behind their knees. Nell just barely suppressed the reflex to push him away as he clutched at their pants. Looking back up at Usopp, shaking and crying in the infirmary bed, they held up their hands in surrender. They were doing that a lot lately. It chafed. "Usopp," they spoke slowly, trying to calm him like they would a wounded animal, hoping that the wounded animal poorly hiding behind them didn't make any more sudden moves. "Everything's fine. You're safe." "What is that thing?" he choked out. "It looks like some kind of monster." They could hear Chopper sniffling behind them. "This is Chopper. He's a reindeer and he's not going to hurt you." They crouched down, placing their non-casted hand on top of Chopper's head, in between the antlers. They then realized that in his flail off the bed, his hat had fallen into Usopp's lap. That was the first time they saw him without it since being taken. "He's the doctor, and he's just here because he heard you shout and was worried." "That thing is a doctor?" Usopp asked. A tense, quiet moment passed. Nell didn't know how to answer. "That thing can hear you," Chopper said, voice choked and cracking. Usopp squeaked. "Now as long as you're not hurt, I'm going to go back to what I was doing." Nell watched Usopp as Chopper unripped his hooves from their pants. He was staring Chopper down, waiting for something to happen. His hands were gripping his sheets, his forgotten strength nearly tearing the fabric. "Thank you, Nell," Chopper said quietly, and they looked back down at him. "Call for me if you need anything else." He patted his head, furry face going somehow even more distraught for a moment before looking at Usopp's bed. He turned to leave. "I'll be back after lunch to examine both of you." Nell looked back at Usopp, his face a mess of terror and confusion. He stared back at them, eyes watering, then looked down at the hat in his lap, then at the dejected little reindeer making his way out of the room. Usopp looked at Chopper for a long moment, tracking him as he walked to the door. His face morphed into something stubborn, less faltering, something that looked out of place with the tear tracks. Chopper was opening the door when Usopp stuttered out, "Wait," voice cracking. Chopper turned slowly, hoof still on the door. "I think you dropped this," he said, holding the hat out towards him. For a second, there was silence. Chopper lit up, face breaking into a wide grin before he started hopping one foot to the other, his hooves clacking on the floor. Nell could see the effort it was taking him to walk slow and careful towards the offered hat, bouncing every other step, seemingly to just get out the excess excitement. When he finally made it to the bedside, he only had eyes for the hat. Okay, but truly, what was with pirates and hats? Slowly, oh so slowly, Chopper took the hat from Usopp, careful not to let his hooves brush his fingers. He pulled it onto his head immediately before grinning up at him, still dancing with that 1,000-volt smile. "Thanks, Usopp," he said. And like that, he was gone. Nell fell back into their chair with a thump as Usopp sat frozen, arms still outstretched. "What just happened?" Usopp asked, though it didn't seem like it was directed at them for once. They figured they should answer anyway. They heaved a sigh. "You just met the ship's doctor. Or, technically, you re-met the doctor." Nell turned back towards the weirdly good, possibly still poisoned but, hell, what did they care at that point, and rapidly cooling soup. "His name is Chopper. No, that's not why he's a doctor. He isn't even a surgeon. Yes, he is a reindeer. No, he's not going to hurt you." Hopefully that answered enough of his questions that they could eat for a minute without interruption. Behind them, Usopp was silent. They could hear his still shuddering breaths as he came down from whatever panic Chopper's sudden appearance caused. "I can't say anything else," they thought. "He's not my crew. It's not my problem." Usopp sniffled. Nell sighed. Turning around again, they met his gaze. His eyes were wide and dazed. "Listen, I can't say anything specific, it's not my story to tell," they said, pressing their face into their hands. "But please believe me when I tell you, every crewmate on this ship cares about you. They want you to be okay. And yes, some of them are going to be pretty strange looking from your standards, but they would all rather take a trip to Impel Down than know that they're scaring you. Just," they looked up, "give them the benefit of the doubt? Please?" Their sanity hinged on it. Usopp blinked, a couple stray tears tracing their way out of his eyes with it. He paused, mouth opening and closing as they could nearly see the gears in his head turn. The look was uncomfortably familiar, reminding them a bit too much of the last time they saw the Commodore. They still had hope then. Not a med sword hanging over their head that they could feel lower with every wrong word said. The weight was maddening. Finally, they figured Usopp wasn't going to say anything to them, and turned back to their soup. Somehow it was still a little warm. It was mildly annoying how good it was, but that may have also been the fact that that was their first time eating since being kidnapped. The bread beside it was the same. But, they figured, if it was going to be their last couple of days, might as well enjoy the good food of the probably evil, possibly cannibalistic pirate cook. Another moment passed and Nell heard Usopp's spoon scraping the bowl too. They slumped with relief and tore into the bread with a little more gusto. If there was anything that Nell knew about Blackleg Sanji, it was that he hated for people not to eat what he fed them. If Usopp hadn't eaten anything, he was gonna get more said. And it wasn't like he was gonna take his anger out on the injured, amnesiac crewmate. A stray marine, though? Just because Straw Hat wanted them alive did not mean that they couldn't get there but beat. Nell skirted around Blackleg's awareness yesterday and got away with not eating breakfast today. They wouldn't get away with letting Usopp go hungry. The next few moments passed in relative silence as they both ate and were left with their own thoughts. Nell didn't know what was going on inside Usopp's head, but they could guess that whatever it was, wasn't pleasant. Though they couldn't say anything either. At least when Usopp was talking, or babbling, it distracted them. It felt frighteningly similar to work, so they could just fall back into the rhythm of it. But without that, it was just Nell and their poison mind. And they were left in the same place that they were an hour ago, before Usopp woke. Alone. And scared. With every scrape of the spoon, every creak of the ship, every note of the music drifting in the window, Nell was reminded of exactly where they were. And just how screwed they were. It was beyond screwed, beyond effed. They were a dead marine walking, and they were desperately trying to forget it and spend their last days not in constant terror. Every pirate on the ship could and would kill them without a second thought, in increasingly creative and horrific ways. Hell, they might even just get killed by accident. They saw Straw Hat wrestling with Chopper on the deck that morning as Usopp slept, a show of casual strength and power so ridiculous that they couldn't help but watch. The match ended with Chopper shifting into a 7-foot-tall man-beast and tossing Straw Hat, Emperor Straw Hat, what the F, so high that he ended up on the crow's nest, laughing into the wind. With strength like that, one annoyed cuff on the ear could break Nell's neck, one stray fist could make a hole in their chest. Their only saving grace was that it seemed like they were deemed harmless enough to be left in the infirmary, babysitting. They were constantly torn between relieved and insulted on that front. It burned to be so helpless, grated against their nerves like sandpaper on skin. They joined the Marines to get strong and fight back against the world's evils, not be trapped like an ant in a farm, toiling away under the cover until a magnifying glass came along. They wanted to help people that didn't have anybody else, give them something to hold on to, something to hope for. But no. Instead, they spent the last 3 years the glorified secretary to a pompous idiot and were going to meet an anticlimactic end off the stern of a ship with a lawn and an aquarium. Some strong fighter they were. Some hero. Cleo would be so disappointed in them. Nell was so lost in their mired thoughts that they didn't hear Usopp until his whisper was nearly a shout. As they came back to their body again, they realized that they'd been sitting with an empty spoon halfway to their mouth for who knew how long. Nell. Usopp was trying to be quiet, they could tell, but it would have been more discreet if he just talked rather than hissed at them. They turned to look at him. I've been calling you for the past 30 seconds, oh my god, someone's coming. He was leaning forward in bed as much as his pain would let, a fine tremor running through his shoulders as he strained. Nell listened for a moment, hoping that maybe they'd dazed for long enough that it was just Chopper returning as promised. But no, they weren't lucky enough for that. Why would they ever think they were lucky enough for that? Two voices, one higher pitched than the other. That was definitely Cat Burglar Nami, not the most terrifying member power-wise, meaning she probably couldn't kill them by accident, but as the navigator she did hold sway over every other crewmate, not to mention they were all in debt to her, if she was to be believed. And the other voice was lower but not deep or gravel-filled, obviously young with no grand accent, talking to Cat Burglar with the tone of somebody used to getting what they want. Strawhat fucking Luffy. Of course it was Strawhat Luffy. They should have expected it, should have planned for it. It was frankly kind of surprising, now that Nell realized it, that he wasn't the first one in the room the instant Usopp woke. Straw Hat's as selfishly protective of his crewmates as Fing Whitebeard. Everybody knew that. The Straw Hats were a deadly crew, but put one in danger, real danger, and nothing could save you from Straw Hat's fury. That knowledge was what got them into this mess in the first place. But, of course they didn't expect it. They didn't want to consider it as a possibly, so it just conveniently slipped their mind. Not for the first time, they cursed stupid Fing Nice and his stupid Fing plan of taking on Emperor Goddamn Straw Hat. Nell felt their face pale and they knew that they looked as scared as they felt. If that went on any longer, Usopp was going to start panicking too. That wouldn't be good for anybody. As fast as they could stomach, Nell steeled themselves, pushing away their fear and pain and panic to somewhere deep enough that they could just deal with it later, or maybe never, depending on if they lived through the next 10 minutes. That will be Cat Burglar Nami, the navigator, and, they took a breath, praying for their voice to not crack, Strawhat Luffy. They must be coming to check on you now that you're awake. If anything, that just seemed to make him more agitated. His eyes blew wide and for a moment Nell wondered if he recognized the name somehow. What? Why would they want to do that? Are they gonna talk to me? What are they gonna ask? You know, just because I'm the great Captain Usopp doesn't mean I can get over amnesia within a few minutes, they know that right? I'm no use for giving directions when I don't even know what sea we're in, they know that right? Whoa, 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 they held up their hands, what do you mean, directions? Usopp started sweating. The door opened. Nell held their breath. Usopp flinched. The thing about Strawhat Luffy that Nell had realized in their short stay on the ship so far, was that he was a man that didn't listen to the word no. Which, with most men, would be a glaring and unforgivable fault, something that would make him an immediate monster, a vile creature that only listened to his own thoughts and gave no care for others' desires. And maybe he was that, Nell wouldn't put it past any pirate. But instead of it making him greedy and cruel, it just seemed to make him childlike. Not childish, not naive and innocent, but childlike. Young and uninhibited. Prone to flights of fancy and decisions made solely on impulse. Hard to read and even harder to predict. Nell didn't like that. They didn't like that he could be playing tag and destroying Nell's life at the same time without a thought to either, didn't like that he always had such a carefree look on his face, even when mowing down platoons of good Marines, didn't like that they couldn't predict what would set him off, what would turn off that guileless grin and bring back the carved marble man that dropped every soldier on that ship like a house of cards. Nell could deal with cruel, they despised unpredictable. Nell expected Strawhat Luffy to come bounding into the infirmary. They expected him to be loud and animated and unthinking. They expected him to rush right up to Usopp's bedside, not that he was scaring him half to death. None of those things happened. Cat Burglar was the first person in the room, strolling in with a book under one arm and a bundle of rolled papers under the other. She barely gave them a glance as she entered, as focused as she was on Usopp. Straw Hat came in next, slowly, sedately, with the wide, obvious movements of somebody used to dealing with feral animals or frightened children. Though another glance showed them that he was bouncing on the ball of his feet, apparently unable to be still when he wasn't carved of stone. He looked at Nell. His eyes were wide and dark and deep. They felt like they were being assessed, like every part of them was being stripped bare, flayed and exposed to air to rot. They knew that if they had said a single unkind word to Usopp, Straw Hat would have known. He would have known and he wouldn't have been pleased. He stared at them for a moment longer unflinching, unblinking, and Nell couldn't look away. They were trapped like a bug under a microscope, an ant under a magnifying glass. And things were getting hot. In an instant, it was over. Straw Hat looked away and Nell was free. They could breathe again. They tried to do it as quietly as possible. Usopp, Straw Hat said, grin fixed back on his face. Chopper said you were awake. Yees? Usopp said, obviously not knowing where to look as his gaze flicked over Straw Hat, Cat Burglar, and Nell themselves. Yes. I thought it would be a good idea to come talk to you before Chopper came back in, and Luffy insisted on coming with me, Cat Burglar sighed, doing a very good impression of someone annoyed and put upon. But anyway, introductions. I'm Nami, and this is Straw Hat cut her off. I'm Luffy and I'm gonna become kin. Cat Burglar slapped a hand across his face with an audible smack. Nell jumped. Idiot, she hissed. What did I say? Whatever he answered was muffled by the hand still over his mouth. Exactly. She looked back at Usopp, who was looking at her wide eyes. Sorry about that, what was I saying? Introductions, I think. Right, introductions. Now, she cut off with a high, indignant screech, finally releasing Straw Hat's face. Luffy, did you just lick my hand? You didn't let go, he said as if that was the correct response, as if he couldn't just make her let go, as if he wasn't the captain. I want to talk to Usopp too. You didn't have to lick my you know what? She put a hand, the other one, to her face. Never mind, this isn't worth it. Cat Burglar started rifling through her papers and Nell didn't want to move. Usopp was looking at them, and then looking back at Straw Hat staring at him, and looking back at them. Idly, they wondered if his neck was still hurting that bad to be moving at all, even that small amount. Anyway, how do you feel? She asked, still shuffling pages. Okay. Better than when I woke up. He paused for a moment and took a breath. But that only to be expected for the great Captain Usopp, the strongest man in the East Blue and adventurer extraordinaire. Did you know that I once fell off of a building that was suspended over a massive hole in the ocean floor? I walked away from that fall with nary a scratch, having used my trusty slingshot to swing myself across the chasm to safety, along with the body of a giant sea monster that had decided that I was an easy snack. He found out not to mess with the great Usopp that day, I can tell you. We, that is, me and my crew, ate that sea beast for a month, it was so large. The bones of it still stand on my island, where they make a new mountain. Straw Hat's grin was unsettlingly wide as he stared at Usopp, stars in his eyes. Wow, that's so cool, Usopp. Wait, did you say a hole in the ocean? Cat Burglar finally looked up, a furrow in her brow. Hard to believe, I know, he was on a roll now, but truth is often stranger than fiction. There was truly a hole in the ocean, creating a massive waterfall into nothingness from which nothing could return. Except me, the great Captain Usopp. I bested that chasm and lived to tell the tale. He was mainly talking to Straw Hat, making more flourishes as his story got stranger. Though, there was something about it that they couldn't put their finger on. Something almost familiar. Something that they'd have to think about once their brains started working again. Cat Burglar whipped her head around to find Nell. They stiffened like a body on a rack. Marine, she said, scram. This is private. That wasn't a suggestion. They nodded, not trusting their voice to work. Standing on weak legs, they sent one last look at Usopp, who was staring them uneasily. They hoped the look they gave him was assured enough that he wouldn't start having a panic attack the instant they set foot out the door. They weren't sure how successful they were. Nell walked out robotically, abandoning their empty tray in order to be able to open the door. It creaked and they winced at the noise, glancing back. Cat Burglar and Straw Hat weren't paying any attention to them. The door closed behind them and for a moment they were relieved. Relieved to be in the sunshine, to be out of that room. To be walking on their own 2 feet. But it was only a moment. And then reality crashed back on them. They were alone, a lone marine on a pirate ship. The crew obviously didn't think they were enough of a threat to their safety to monitor them constantly, but who knew what someone like Demon Hunter or Soul King would do with them if they found them alone. They shuddered to imagine it. They took a quick stock. Straw Hat, Cat Burglar, and Usopp were in the infirmary, which was off limits. Finding Chopper would be their best bet, but he wasn't on the deck that they could see and they were absolutely not going to start wandering anywhere below. Knight of the Sea was also probably a safe bet but he was also not visible. Cyborg was a wild card, and a big one at that. Demon Child, Demon Hunter, and Soul King were absolutely nots. Which left one man. One powerful, irritable, and capricious man that was almost guaranteed to be found just a room over, where an amazing smell was wafting out. Taking a step towards the galley, Nell couldn't help but think, I hope Blackleg isn't someone that hates help in his kitchen. Usopp was, at the present moment, really confused. Sure there were some other emotions in there, jostling for attention, anxiety as always, a good chunk of fear, and a healthy dash of panic being some of the biggest but all in all, he just didn't know what to make of anything. Nell was the only person that made any sense that he'd seen since waking up, not exactly a high bar, but he'd take what he could get, and with them shoot away after turning an alarming shade of white. Usopp was left floundering. At least, he thought, his mouth still moving faster than his brain could catch up to. Luffy seems nice. And that was the thing. Luffy did seem nice. He was a great audience, oohing and awing at all the right spots, eyes wide and shining as Usopp realized it didn't hurt to make big swooping hand gestures. His face was round and open, teeth bared with his wide smile. Usopp could get lost in a story with that good an audience. Hell, he'd almost say Luffy was a better audience than Kaya. Kaya knew they were jokes, knew that everything that came out of his mouth was lies, and liked him for it. Luffy though. Luffy looked like he actually believed him. But if Luffy was so nice, what was it that made Nell go so stark pale that every freckle stood out on their face? What was it that made them, someone who'd stood firm against the terrifying cook and the freaky doctor, stand and leave on shaking legs? If it had been Nami, the navigator, sees there was a navigator that wanted to talk to him, that wouldn't made at least more sense. She had the same kind of sharp eyes that Usopp saw sometimes with the rare sailors that blew through syrup. A look that said that she could calculate your worth down to the berry. A look that said she'd planned 5 steps ahead of whatever he was going to say next. A look that said that she knew what he was and she was not impressed. It was the look of a person that knew exactly what she was, and what she was right. The instant she looked back up from having her nose buried in the mountain of maps and logs she had, he needed to be ready to bullshit more than he'd ever bullshit before. But Luffy? The guy that was barely older than Usopp, that was wearing bright colors and a tatty straw hat, that clapped like a seal when he laughed, that liked the navigator's hand like a little brother, that apparently didn't even have a named role on the ship, that was the guy that Nell was afraid of? Usopp was missing something, and it itched in the back of his mind. The only thing his brain seemed to be able to grasp was story he was feeding Luffy. So there I was surrounded, trapped by zombies hungering for me and my crew's flesh. I tried to warn them, messing with me would end up with the back in the ground the hard way. But they didn't listen. He paused for dramatic effect and heard Luffy's soft, wow. Something familiar warmed in his chest. Something that reminded him of the early days with the Usopp pirates, before they got older and started smartening up to his lies. No, of course they didn't listen. What more, they laughed at me. Their laugh sounded like ground glass in raw beef, exactly what I expected for hunks of flesh being puppeted around by an evil mastermind. They closed in. Closer, and closer, and closer. Until he got right up in Luffy's face. Boom! Luffy lurched back, falling off the stool to bounce on his butt, laughing. I got them right where I wanted them and set the whole lot ablaze with my trusty slingshot. They caught fire like a pile of dry hay. That's so cool, Usopp, Luffy said, still laughing. What happened next? Well, my crew and I left, of course, off to a new adventure under the sea. We bested the evil undead and left with the spoils, more gold than we could carry and a new set of bones to keep on the ship as a warning to anybody that wanted to question the great Captain Usopp's skill. Luffy laughed, clapping loud enough that Usopp could feel the noise pounding on his eardrums. It wasn't exactly helping his headache, but oh well, at least someone was listening to him. He almost launched himself into another story, some half-formed thing about an island of toys, when the navigator closed her book shut with a snap. Usopp jumped, teeth clacking together as his jaw closed. The movement jarred his neck, sending a shock down his spine that he could feel to the tips of his fingers. After the spasm passed, Usopp loosened his clenched teeth and realized that he'd closed his eyes again. Peeking through one, he found Luffy first. His smile was gone, in its place was an intense look, staring at Usopp without blinking. He looked away. The navigator looked mostly the same, still sharp, still calculating, but there was something in the curve of her mouth that looked softer? Nah, not softer. Soft was Kaya, and Mom, and the navigator couldn't be further from that. Concerned, maybe. But not soft. Maybe we should get Chopper again, she said. Usopp could feel his face pale as the blood drained. Nope, no reason to worry him again, I'm totally fine, better than fine actually. That right there was just a twinge, just a little crick in the neck, you know how it is when you sleep wrong and, Usopp trailed off when he saw both of their expressions. They saw right through him. It was like his skin was glass and they could look and see his rotten insides. If you say so, Nami shrugged, giving Luffy a sharp glance. Either Usopp was very lucky, wrong, or Nami didn't care enough to try to bullshit the bullshitter. Usopp supposed he should be grateful that she was willing to drop it. Instead it just made him feel alone. He just wanted to go home. Luffy, clear the table, Nami said, pulling out a couple rolled papers from under her arm. Luffy followed her order easily and without question, still looking at Usopp with that piercing stare. Usopp tried not to squirm under the scrutiny. There was just something about the way Luffy looked at him that made him want to sit straighter. Want to act like the man he pretended he was. He didn't get it. Luffy stopped laughing and playing along, and suddenly it was like there was someone completely different in the room with him. The happy audience member was still there. Usopp could see it in the way he still smiled every time he caught his eye, but there was something different about him. There weren't many big predators in Syrup. The biggest thing they had to routinely watch out for were angry dogs and moon bears, which were barely bigger and much more skittish. But once, Usopp had gone fishing with one of the villagers that felt bad for him. The boat was big and made for longer voyages, and Usopp felt actually connected to his dad for the first time since he picked up his slingshot. The sea seemed to call to him, and he was so excited when the fishermen said they'd be going out further than planned. Usopp watched the island turn into a speck on the horizon, and he knew that he wanted to be out on the sea. Then he heard it. A splash in the distance. Usopp had looked all around the deck, trying to see what made the noise, trying to catch a glimpse of whatever deep-sea creature he could. And he did. Off the stern of the ship Usopp could see it. A massive pillar of scales and flesh reaching into the sky to snatch a news coup from the air in one single gulp. A sea king. It was far away and uninterested in them with its new snack, but Usopp knew with a bone-deep certainty that if that thing had wanted to hurt them, that there was nothing he could do to stop it. That quick sight of Luffy, of whatever was under the mask, make his knees shake like that day, the day he realized just how small he actually was. What was it about him that was so intimidating? So big? He was a young guy, maybe 20, with a ratty straw hat and big eyes and a bigger smile. He listened to Nami like they were old friends, bickered with her like siblings, was kind and attentive and downright jolly. Out of all the people they'd met since they woke up in this crazy room on this crazy ship where everyone seemed to know him already, Luffy was the only one that didn't seem to hold his lack of memory against him at all. So why was Usopp's heart racing out of his chest like a rabbit? And why the hell did Nell look like they were ready to bolt the instant they heard his voice? Did they know something he didn't? What is he talking about? Of course they did. Nell was the one with a working brain. A book landed on the table above his lap with a dull thump, jerking Usopp out of his spiral. His eyes cleared to see that Luffy had moved to the other side of the bed, where Nami scooted closer to the head and was weighing down a map of what looked like the East Blue with a heavy book. At his glance, Luffy grinned. So, okay, let's start with the basics, she said. You're from here, Gecko Islands, Syrup Village. I'm from here, Konomi Islands, Kokoyashi Village, and Luffy is from here, Dawn Island. She pointed to different islands in the general vicinity of his home. He'd vaguely heard of the different islands from travelers and the rare books he could get his hands on, so she probably wasn't lying. But why start with backstory? I'm telling you this to prove to you that we have history together. Holy sheet, could she read minds? And no, I can't read your mind, I just know you. That was not good proof that she couldn't read minds. Anyway, besides us, there are 7 other people on the crew. You met Sanji and Chopper. There's also Zoro, Robin, Frankie, Brook, and Jinbei. Sanji and Zoro are both from the east, Robin and Brook are from the west, and the rest are from first half of the Grand Line. She stopped, like when he'd stopped talking in the middle of a story for dramatic effect. She would make a good storyteller, knowing where to stop and slow like that. And then the words she said finally clunked into place. Wait, okay, pause. Usopp took a breath in. What? See, this is why we're starting with the basics. Nami rolled her eyes. On the other side of him, Luffy pouted. Seriously, what was with this guy? It would have been fine if we did it my way, he said. No, it would not have. It would have been a disaster and he would have passed out. What do you mean they're from the Grand Line? Like, the Grand Line? Grand Line? The pirate graveyard? The virtually unmapped, crazy unpredictable ocean that nobody but Gold Roger, the Pirate King, has made it to the end of? That Grand Line? Usopp was trying very hard not to hyperventilate. Yup, Luffy chirped, still happy, idly twisting back and forth on the stool he was perched on. Same place your dad is. How the hell did you guys recruit people from the Grand Line? Did you go there? Did you leave? Was it scary? Was it insane? Are they scary? How can anybody live in the Grand Line? Is that why the reindeer looks like that? Do they all look like that? He stopped, still stuttering, mind-whirring to keep up. Usopp looked to stare at Luffy. What do you mean my dad? You know, your dad, Yasopp, he said like Usopp's world wasn't shattering. Was the ship tilting? It felt like it was tilting. I met him when I was a kid, he's part of this really cool crew and he's one of the best snipers in the world. When they left my island, his captain, who's a really strong pirate, told me they were gonna go to the Grand Line. So that's where he is now, probably. His dad. His dad was in the Grand Line. His dad was on a pirate crew with a strong captain. His dad was one of the world's greatest snipers and he was surviving in the Grand Line. His dad was in the East Blue for long enough to get to know some random other kid. Nami pointed out their islands. Dawn wasn't far. Well, of course he's the best sniper in the world, he's my dad. His blood runs through my veins and I'm gonna be just like him when I go out to sea. People all over the world will know to fear my name, Usopp son of Yasopp. His eyes were burning and he wiped at them quickly. Men didn't cry. Luffy's grin was like the sun, it was so blinding. Exactly. Usopp had to look away. He looked like he really believed that. Anyway, Nami said, leaning over Usopp to push away Luffy's face that had gotten really close to him in his enthusiasm. Because that cat's out of the bag, there's just one more thing to get through and we'll let you get back to your lunch. She rolled up the map that was on the table, putting the book in the middle and tapping on the cover. He couldn't even brace himself for any questions before spotting the title of the book. A Comprehensive Guide to the Known Devil Fruits. Do you know what a devil fruit is? She asked. Was that what he said he'd lead them to? Some kind of rare fruit thing? Or maybe it was a title for different special weapons. Devil fruit sounded familiar in the way that an old fairy tale sounded familiar. You can't place it until you hear it again and then it's just pure déjà vu. Judging by the look on your face, that's a no, she said, flipping to a specific page. Usopp winced. Here, this is the gum fruit. The fruit on the page was purple and vaguely apple-shaped, with large swirls on the skin that looked almost carved in. There was a small blurb under the picture that Usopp leaned in to read once he saw Nami tap the book with a dulled nail. The gum fruit is a paramecia type that gives the consumer all attributes of rubber in and out of battle. The user is known as a rubber man. Something was itching in the back of Usopp's brain again, dense and irritating. Maybe this was some rare thing that he said existed and had blustered enough that they believed he could find it. That would make sense. Pirates were always chasing adventures that were possibly real, possibly stories. His spirits started lifting with a goal in mind. All he'd have to do would be to find a convincing enough place for it to have been, claim that it was already found, and be on his way. He'd have plenty of time to figure out a convincing enough lie to feed them on what happened to the weird fruit, as long as they didn't just outright kill him when he failed to deliver. But Luffy seemed to like him. And as terrifying as the cook and the reindeer and Nami were, none of them seemed like they disliked him. Plus Nell said that I can trust them, he thought. If he played his cards right, he might make it out in one piece. So what is that? He asked after a minute of his mind swirling. Devil fruits are rare fruits that imbue the user with a power of some kind in exchange for being a hammer in water, Nami said, as if she was reciting from a book. Usopp nodded along, mind whirling. Maybe I can make a fake one, he thought. Pretend to find it and have them drop me back home with nobody the wiser. Nobody would be able to find that anyway. Luffy's got this one. Sheet. Wait. What? Usopp's head snapped up to Luffy, who was still grinning. What I mean? Where? He asked, glancing around like it would manifest in the room from just its name alone. I don't have it somewhere, he said, like Usopp was joking and he was happy to play along. I have it. I'm a rubberman. Before Usopp could consider what it meant that he was on a ship full of crazy pirates, Luffy hooked a finger in his cheek and pulled. And pulled. And pulled. The meat and skin of his face stretched away from bone like it was taffy, lengthening to a point where his arm was fully extended outward. He let go and his cheek hit his face with a rubber snap, the force of it knocking him a little off kilter, but not off the stool. He flung his arms out to the sides to keep his balance and Usopp could see it now. His joints didn't move right. His fingers stretched too far, elbows going backward, neck twisting just a little further than what a normal human would. Because he wasn't normal. Because Luffy wasn't human. Usopp expected to feel hot panic bubbling back up in his gut and choking him. Instead, all he could feel was an icy numbness spreading from the center of his chest to the tips of his fingers. It engulfed everything that was building into a terrified crescendo, leaving him cold and still. He could feel his eyes glaze as they unfocused, letting his body nod along to whatever Nami had continued to say as he froze solid. If Luffy, there's also Robin, Brook, and Chopper who have fruits. She paused, looking up. He thinks she must have tried to meet his gaze, but as unfocused as it was, she probably just gave up when he didn't look back. Usopp? She snapped fingers in front of his face. He blinked. Sorry, what? He said. His voice sounded hollow and distant to his ears, like he was underwater. I didn't catch that. I think, she said, with a voice unlike the one she'd been using before. It sounded odd on her. I think that's enough for right now. Okay, if you need anything else, Usopp said, barely thinking, just letting his mouth run on instinct, just let me know. He slumped back, sinking into the pillows the terrifying chef piled behind him to lean against. He tried to conjure up anything else to say, looking at Nami's furrowed brow and knowing he did something wrong, but nothing would come. His tongue was a lump of cold flesh in his mouth, uncomfortable and unwieldy. Distantly, Usopp could see Nami packing up the supplies she came in with, rolling the map with the utmost care and placing the food that he'd barely touched back on the tray in his lap. His eyes followed her, blurred and unfocused, as she puttered. She turned back to him, arms full, and opened her mouth to say something. "Yo Luffy," she stuttered, with something like warning coloring her words. Usopp glanced over to find Luffy hadn't moved to leave like Nami was. Instead he was leaning deep into Usopp's personal space, almost nose to nose once Usopp turned. He almost wanted to flinch back, the instinct fighting through the cold mire. He blinked. "Usopp," Luffy said, with a palpable weight. "Are you okay?" He asked it like he already knew the answer. Something cracked inside him. I mean you see, he tried to say. He knew he needed to say something, to answer this confusing, intimidating, happy pirate, but no words were pushing their way through. "Usopp," Luffy said again, his hands coming up to squish Usopp's cheeks together. They were warm and calloused and rubbery, fingers just barely reaching to thread through the hair at his temples that he didn't realize was down. "My name is Monkey D. Luffy. I am the man who's gonna be the king of the pirates." Something slotted into place in Usopp's mind, an inevitability that he hadn't realized existed but made more sense than anything else he'd experienced since waking. "That explains it," he thought idly, staring into Luffy's dark black eyes. "And you," he pulled himself closer, "are my friend." Something big and hot and as bright as the sun bloomed in the center of his chest, burning away the ice that had barely had the time to form. His eyes started watering again, tears tracing their way down his face to land on Luffy's hands. "Okay," Usopp said. And Luffy laughed. The door to the galley was big and sturdy, covered in scuff marks and hairline cracks and one dent that looked suspiciously like a handprint. Nell could hear the soft sounds of clinking pans and something boiling from inside, with no voices to break the calm. Between the cracks of the door, a fantastic smell was wafting out, deep and spicy and warm. Nell was only able to notice all of these things because they'd been standing in front of the door for the last 5 minutes, trying to work up the nerve to turn the handle that their hand was sitting on. Distantly, they thought it was a little unfair cosmically that pirates consistently had these fantastic chefs recruited from parts unknown while Marines just had to make do with whatever unlucky quartermaster had a history with nutrition. Don't get them wrong, Nell had nothing against their head cook, especially seeing as they'd yet to get scurvy or pellagra. But when your cook's idea of a good meal consisted of anything deep-fried or excessively salted, the mere hint of a spice other than pepper became very enticing. Nell was so lost in their head that they didn't recognize that the door they'd been hovering in front of was opening until it was a foot away from their face. They jumped back with a start, only just avoiding a broken nose as the breeze ruffled their braids. Nell opened their mouth to yell at the person exiting to look where they were going, mind still full of marine ships and galleys and cooks. But Nell had forgotten where they were. In front of them, slightly shorter but so much bigger, was Demon Hunter Roronoa Zoro. The words they were going to shout died in their throat as they formed, choking them. Demon Hunter looked at them, his single eye pinning them to the wood of the deck. Nell knew fear. They knew how it affected them, how to deal with how it tightened their lungs and quickened the pace of their heart. They knew how to grab fear and run with it and use its power and its energy to survive and keep as many of their subordinates alive as possible. Nell had been afraid since the moment they boarded the strange bright ship, with its stranger, brighter pirates. Hell, they'd been afraid since the instant that they saw that greedy, arrogant grin on Nias's face when he spotted the ship on the far horizon. Nell had never been bone-deep terrified like they were in the gaze of Demon Hunter. There was something in the back of their mind, that old animal part of their brain, that was absolutely certain that if they made the first move, if they shifted, if they even breathed, Demon Hunter would have no qualms cutting them down where they stood and stepping over their cooling corpse. If Nell gave even the impression of an idea that they were a threat to anybody on his crew, their life would be forfeit in the most bloody, painful way possible. His free hand fell on the swords at his hip with a soft clink and Nell couldn't help but take a step back, hand coming back to grip the rail behind them. Time dripped slow as molasses as they stared each other down. "Hey, Mosshead!" Blackleg's voice cut through the terror gripping their throat. "Quit hovering, you're letting the heat out." Demon Hunter snorted like a beast, his eye leaving Nell to roll and hand falling off his swords to his side. He walked away without another words, heavy boots clunking on the deck as he brushed past them. The door to the galley closed with a smooth click and Nell could breathe again. Well, Nell thought, a little manic even to themselves, at least I know where he is now. They glanced behind them to the deck to see Demon Hunter settle in the grass, swords over his lap and a bottle of sake in his hand. At their look, he met their gaze steadily. It burned them. Nell looked away quick, hand going straight to the galley handle. Blackleg was a possibly cannibalistic, monstrous a-hole, but at least he was predictable. Listen to what he says, eat his food, don't ask too many questions and they'd fine. Same as any commanding officer they'd ever had. Minus the cannibalism. Hell, if you listen to the weirdos over in G5, the Commodore and Captain excluded, Blackleg was one of the kindest members in the entire DMN crew. Though Nell would bet Barry that anybody saying that had never met Chopper. The door opened smooth and easy, lighter than they expected based on its scale. As Nell stepped inside, closing it softly behind them, they were wrapped in the cozy warmth of a kitchen being used. Something in them relaxed against their will as they stood at attention, not taking their eyes off of Blackleg's back. "Are you still hungry?" he called, voice gruff and slightly raised to carry over the noise of whatever was bubbling and hissing on the stove in front of him. They started. Paused. Remembered his whole thing with food. "No, thank you. The soup was delicious." "Course it was. That's one of my best recipes," he said, lowering a dial on the stove and turning to face them, towel slung over one shoulder. "Then what the hell are you doing in here, Marine?" They paused again. For a moment, they considered lying. Spin some tale about being an aspiring cook that wanted to learn from him? No, he knew what they thought of his cooking. Tell him that Usopp needed more food and they were just there to collect? No, he probably knew that his crewmates were heading into the infirmary. They'd tell him if Usopp was hungry. Say that they were scared of the rest of the crew but felt comfortable with him? Nell wasn't a bad liar, but even a blind man could see through that one. Why were they there? As a calculated risk to avoid the most dangerous, unpredictable crew while they were banned from Chopper's territory. But why there? They could have stayed anywhere on the ship, the deck, the helm, even in that ridiculous little copse of orange trees. Even Demon Hunter, as terrifying as he was, didn't seem like he would start anything as long as Nell behaved. Though, they of course had no guarantee, because when would they ever get a break? So why willingly go towards a pirate that had so far only showed them anger and disdain? Blackleg was still staring at them, arms crossed. "I want to work, sir," they finally settled on. They were surprised to find that it wasn't a lie. "You want to work?" His swirled eyebrow raised. Nell idly thought the expression would be more impactful if they could see both eyes. As it was, he just kind of looked surprised. "Yes. I'm sick of just sitting and waiting," they said, more surprising truth. "And besides, I was evicted from the infirmary, so I figured I'd ought to go somewhere." "What?" A small, high voice exclaimed from behind them. Nell couldn't help but jump as they twisted. Nell saw in a corner of the couch, with a book on his lap and a mug in his hoof, Dr. Chopper. Inwardly, they chided themselves on missing an entire person in the room with them. "What'ya mean, evicted?" he asked. Nell couldn't help but glance back at Blackleg. They couldn't imagine he enjoyed being overshadowed like that, but he was still just standing there, arms crossed. "Straw Hat and Cat Burglar wanted to talk to Usopp privately," they said slowly, turning to have both of them in their eye line. "I thought it prudent to listen." "Ha!" Blackleg barked out a laugh, almost making Nell jump. "Good instincts, Marine. Better to not get on Nami Sweet's bad side." "Still," Chopper said, crossing his arms. The mug in his hoof tilted dangerously. "She's usually good about not messing with my patients." "Stop pouting, I'm sure it's fine." Blackleg started to walk over. Nell had to suppress the urge to get in front of him, stop his progress, as he made for Chopper. "Nami knows what she's doing and I'm sure the Marine wanted to get out of the room." He took the mug out of Chopper's hoof, shooting a glare at Nell over his shoulder. "Right, Marine?" Yes. Exactly," they stuttered a little. "I get restless." Chopper hummed, looking dejected at his lap. "Hey, how about a deal? Before I put any of you freeloaders to work, you do your checkup. You get final say on who does what and how much." "Sound good, Doc," Blackleg said, plucking the book from his lap to lay it open on the couch beside him. Chopper poorly hid a smile as Blackleg held out a hand to shake. "Don't think that makes me happy, you bstrd." He looked over at Nell, eyes still crinkled with joy. "All right, I guess that's okay as long as you're okay with it, Nell." Whether or not Nell was truly all right with it was irrelevant, they could tell from the look Blackleg leveled at them from out of Chopper's eye line. But it looked like Chopper was actually trying to give them the choice, which was sweet of him if nothing else. "Yes, that's fine," they nodded. "Thank you for your diligence, Doctor." Chopper's grin only grew as he stood and Blackleg gave them a considering look that they couldn't parse. Their mind and body was still buzzing with the adrenaline from the last 10 minutes and anything that wasn't related to pure survival was filed in the back of their brain, marked, for future consideration. Blackleg's public reputation was pure muscle and a lot of it, with strength enough to keep up with Demon Hunter's ferocity and rival cruise captains without the help of a devil fruit. They hesitated to attribute any of it to his Germa upbringing, or even to think about it too loudly in his presence, as he viciously renounced his heritage at every opportunity. He even went so far to claim the retired, thought dead, Red-Leg Zeph as his true family. Though, through the little bit of digging they did after the war, when they were bed-bound and desperate for any kind of stimuli that wasn't screaming, Nell found that angry muscle was far from all Blackleg was. He was smart. Downright conniving at times, with a proclivity for stealth that was only topped by Devil Child herself. When he wasn't loud and bombastic and setting things on fire, he was the one that nearly succeeded in stealing Nico Robin off the C train from under CP9's noses before they even made it to Eni's lobby. He was the one that did succeed in closing the gates of justice at Eni's lobby, effectively destroying 5 warships with a single act. Being under his scrutiny may not have been the best idea on Nell's part. But, no backing out now, not when Chopper was in the middle of herding them into a chair at the head of the table. Heard. Maybe they needed some more sleep. Nell sat in the unfairly comfortable chair as Chopper shifted into a tall, human-adjacent form and pulled a chair over for himself. They reminded themselves that 7 feet tall or not, he was still the kindest one on the DMN crew. That they absolutely should not be seen eking away from him as he approached. That he was a doctor, and took that title very seriously. "Can I see your arm?" he said, holding out a large hand. Again with the DMN asking. If anything, it was just confusing. "MHM," they hummed. Chopper sat there, his hand still out. A beat passed. "Oh, did you want me to give you my arm?" Chopper grinned and nodded, like nothing was strange. Nell could feel Blackleg stare on their back and handed their injured arm over before he could say anything more. "Thank you," Chopper said, his big hands taking Nell's arm like it was made of fragile glass. "Sees, this kid was too nice to be a pirate. Does anything hurt? Has your hand gone numb at all? Any excess pain in the past few hours?" The exam started with a resounding round of no's from Nell and a growing smile on Chopper's face. How did they even recruit this kid? Strawhat was not known for coercing his crewmates. "And how's your movement? Any inability to move? Any stiffness?" "No, sir," they said, wiggling their fingers. "It aches a little when I move too quickly, but nothing I can't deal with." Unfortunately that is to be expected in the first few days." He dropped their arm to grab a notepad out of his pocket and scribble something down. "However, if it gets a lot worse very quickly, come see me." "Yes sir," they nodded, moving to stand. A big hand on their shoulder stopped them. They only just suppressed a full-body flinch, knowing for a fact that Blackleg was still staring. "Wait, sorry, just one more thing," Chopper said, pulling his hand back into a mock surrender. "Can I see your neck?" Nell hesitated for a moment. Having the doctor look at their active wound directly after a battle was one thing. Sees, it was even appreciated to have someone check to make sure they didn't have a fractured windpipe. But baring their throat to an enemy with another, much more intimidating one out of their line of sight? The lingering threads of their marine pride and survival instinct screamed. No matter how nice Chopper was, he was a pirate. And pirates couldn't be trusted. But then again, it wasn't like Nell stood a chance in any situation. Chopper was a straw hat. If he'd wanted to hurt them, he wouldn't need their cooperation. And his puppy dog pleading eyes were painful to look at, but Nell didn't want to say that it had anything to do with their acquiescence. Slowly, they unbuttoned their collar, tucking it down and lifting their chin. Nell clenched their working fist and shut their eyes. "Thank you," Chopper said. Somebody had better teach the DMN kid how a pirate's supposed to act around marine prisoners or Nell was going to go insane. The first feather-light touch of his hand on their neck made them twitch. The hand drew back immediately. "Did that hurt?" he asked. "No, sir," they ground out. "Just a surprise." He must have nodded because there was a beat of silence and then the hand was back. Nell was able to suppress their flinch the second time, grinding their teeth together as his fingertips pressed gently against the ring of bruises around their neck. It didn't hurt worse than a slight ache, but with every touch, all Nell could feel was that DMN hand wrapping around their throat and squeezing. Any headaches, trouble swallowing, or trouble breathing? The hand traced the line of their trachea. They stopped breathing. "No. Any excess pain with movement or numbness down your arms?" Fingers roamed their way to the back of their neck to poke at their spine. A trickle of cold sweat dripped its way down their back. "No." And then, all at once, the contact was gone. He was done. Nell tried not to be too shocked. "It looks like it's just some bad bruising," he said. Nell opened their eyes to see him backing up and shift back into his little bipedal form. "If you start having any of those symptoms, come get me right away. I don't think anything is going to happen, but I like to be careful with choking." They nodded, inhaling deep as they rebut-toned their shirt. "You were choked?" Blackleg's voice from behind startled them, making them turn quick and wince at the movement. His face was curled into something other than anger that they couldn't exactly make out. The amount that they weren't able to read him so far was annoying. Yes, sir. During the battle, they said, turning back to Chopper. And thank you, Doctor. Your care is greatly appreciated. Nell was rewarded by the frankly adorable sight of Chopper trying his best to not be flattered. Plus, they figured, it doesn't hurt to be on the good side of the only pirate that seems to tolerate my presence. Nah, back up. Blackleg rounded the chair to look down at them. Choking's not our goddamn style. Who did it? Nell stood. If they were going to be loomed over anyway, they'd rather do it on their own 2 feet. Sanji, Chopper started. Does it matter, sir? They met his hard stare. Sanji, Brook saw it. Chopper tried again and laid a hand on Blackleg's crossed forearm. It was the guy with the devil fruit. The commander. Commodore, they corrected on instinct. Blackleg's gaze snapped back to them. His eyes were burning and it took all of Nell's willpower to keep from stepping back. Your own FING captain? He seethed, his heel making a sharp tap-tap-tap on the wooden floor of the galley. Why? They paused, considering. Why did he care? And what did he get out of the line of questioning? Should Nell lie? No, he'd see through that in a heartbeat. But what if he thought they were lying anyway? They started, embarrassingly hesitant. He seemed to take umbrage to the fact that I did not want to fire on God Usopp. And didn't like what I implied. You what? Chopper's words were small. What did you imply? The old fear of angering Nice crawled its way up Nell's throat for a moment. But Nice wasn't there. And he could burn in hell for all he'd done for them. Why not throw him under the hull? I implied that he started a fight he couldn't win. He didn't like the suggestion that he was weaker than Strawhat. They chuckled a little. Obviously, I was right. Silence suffused the air like fog. The only noise was the ongoing burbling of whatever was cooking on the stove. Blackleg huffed out his nose and Nell could swear they saw smoke. Goddamn BSTRD. We should have killed him when we had the chance. He turned on his heel to walk back to the stove. Come over when you're done, I've got work for you. Nell tried very hard not to feel like they were just judged. Did you really try to help Usopp? Chopper said, voice low and sounding every bit the teenager he reportedly was. Nell crouched so they were eye to eye. If there's anything I know, they said slow, considering every word. It's that your captain would plow through anything that got in his way to help his crew. I found it prudent to not make myself and my crew something that was in the way. Chopper giggled and Nell exhaled. Well, no matter why you did it, he said, smiling up at them. Thank you. You helped Usopp a lot, I think. You're welcome, they said, the words tasting bitter in their mouth. So, Doctor, am I cleared for duty? He nodded, giving Nell a sloppy salute that made them check that Blackleg wasn't looking. They didn't think he'd appreciate his crewmate showing respect to a Marine, though he'd been shockingly permissive so far. Maybe he wasn't as predictable as they'd surmised. But wasn't that a terrifying thought? Just keep it light. No using the bad hand and no strenuous activities. And any worsening pain. He paused, eyes big and pleading. I will come get you, they lied. He clapped, his little hooves clopping in the quiet galley. D'you hear that, Sanji? I won't work the Marine too hard, he said. He sounded like he was rolling his eyes but Chopper's grin only grew. Of course, he wouldn't suspect his crewmate of lying, but Nell knew better. Now scram. I'll call you for dinner in a bit. Chopper left the galley in a little whirlwind of happy giggling and in an instant, Nell was left alone with Blackleg. The warmth that they'd been enjoying in the back of their mind seemed to leave with him, leaving Nell cold, their limbs like blocks of ice. This was what they'd planned from the beginning. So why did they suddenly feel like any sudden movements would get them mauled? They'd felt Conqueror's hockey before, even prior to the disastrous fight yesterday, knew how to recognize it. They knew the feeling of breathlessness, of weight, of the pure, inescapable desire to submit. So they knew that it was not hockey keeping their feet planted. But, seize. They did not want to move. They could hear him moving around behind them, constantly shifting, preparing for something. Dinner, obviously, their mind supplied. But what else? The hairs on the back of their neck stood on end the instant they heard the soft shing of a knife getting pulled from a block. The image of a knife burying itself into their shoulder or thigh or back came to them unbidden. They had no hockey to speak of, but they swore they could sense his bad mood. Though, when wasn't he in a bad mood? Marine, he said. Nell jumped. Come here. Nell heel turned, half instinct to follow orders, half desire to not get fried for ignoring him. His back was facing them as they walked over. He reached to grab something on the counter next to him. Nell braced. Here, Blackleg said, tapping a wooden spoon against their sternum and pointing to a bubbling pot of what looked like some kind of rice dish. Stir this. Make sure nothing sticks to the bottom. What? Nell couldn't help but stutter. Blackleg looked at them, again raising his lone visible eyebrow in what they knew was supposed to be an intimidating look, but just made them want to snort. He just looked surprised. You said you wanted to work. So you're working. Quick as lightning, he grabbed their good arm and pressed the spoon into their hand. Nell didn't even have the time to pull away, so instead they just squeezed their eyes shut. And braced. Again. A beat passed. Blackleg sighed. Fing hell, this is why I don't like hostages. Dropping their arm with the spoon still in their grip, Blackleg tapped Nell's forehead. They opened their eyes. Listen, Marine. I'm not gonna hurt you. Nobody is. You keep helping Usopp and you're safe, got it? A stunned beat passed. It couldn't be that easy. Do you swear? They choked out. What? Fing, sure, yeah I swear. It took all of their willpower to keep from slumping to a puddle on the floor in relief. Finally. Thank the FINGCs, they said after they unstuck their tongue from the roof of their mouth. Blackleg reeled back from them like he was struck, mouth curling into a disgusted grimace. What the sheet? You do not know how much I need that. They almost dropped the spoon he'd given them, arms slumping to their sides. What? A threat? He sounded more confused than angry and Nell couldn't blame him. Suddenly, they were feeling much more generous. A rule. You gave me a rule to follow. They grinned just slightly, sure they looked insane. You have no idea how much I've just been guessing. It's exhausting. Okay, he said, looking at them through the corner of his eye as he went back to his stove. DMN, I knew the Marines were messed up but this is insane. You really can't function without rules? Not on this DMN ship. You people are so unpredictable that I was never sure what'd get me tortured or killed or worse. Sticking the spoon into the rice, Nell started stirring. They were given a job to do. It was embarrassing how good it felt to just be able to do something simple. Just to feel somewhat safe. We're unpredictable? How? Nell almost laughed, considering just how much to tell him. How much he would like hearing. Well, he asked. Your crew has toppled multiple, completely disconnected island regimes, defeated half of the contingent of former warlords, killed 2 emperors, and declared war on the world government. All within the span of less than 3 years, 2 of which you were thought dead, they said. It felt incredible finally having a guarantee of their function on the ship. Would it mean anything the moment Usopp was himself again? No, obviously not. But until then, they were safe. Safe. You have connections to the remnant Whitebeard pirates, the Revolutionary Army, the Kingdom of Wano, and Dark King Rayleigh. Other than Straw Hat's very public aim for the One Piece, nobody has a clue what you're even doing or why. They scrubbed at the bottom of the pan, pulling up a couple stubborn grains that were stuck. Some say world domination, others say toppling the world government, and some are even convinced that you're going after the celestial dragons themselves. And that's not even getting into your crewmates specifically. I mean, Knight of the Sea and Devil Child? How the hell did they get recruited? Blackleg's face was far more considering than it was angry, which just spurred them on further. It was an intoxicating feeling, having your execution delayed. The sword was still there, still hanging, but there was a timer attached. And they finally knew when it would fall. Strangely enough, the only one of your crew that's even slightly predictable is Usopp and you. Not Luffy? Blackleg was listening to them? Of course not. Nell laughed a little. The thought of pulling back flit through their mind for a moment before being drowned out by the overwhelming need to speak and be heard. Straw Hats know for 2 DMN things, protecting his crew and causing as much chaos as physically possible. Or impossible, because C's know he can do that too. Blackleg's brow was raised for a 3rd time, in an expression Nell finally read as actual surprise. Goddamn, Marine, you did your research. They snorted. Not like there was much else I could do. He looked at them, calculating and something else, something deeper. Nell found that they cared a lot less about what he was thinking than they did just a few moments ago. They focused on their task instead, watching the rice swirl in the pot and scraping along the curves. They lapsed into a silence that they would almost call peaceful, leaving Nell to their much less panicked mind. They knew they were a goner, that they were on death row, but at least they finally had evidence that they weren't going to be abused or tortured or subject to some other horrific fate as they waited for the end. They normally wouldn't trust a pirate's word, but the Straw Hats had been shockingly honest thus far. Besides, why would they have any reason to lie? It wasn't like Nell could do anything anyway. So they were, incredibly, choosing to trust that Blackleg was being truthful. It didn't hurt his case that Blackleg seemed to actually be interested in what they were saying, but maybe that was just their wishful thinking. It had been a very long time since somebody had wanted to hear what they had to say, and the fact that they might have that in their last days was a tempting belief to latch onto. The silence continued in a way that Nell could charitably call comfortable. All Blackleg was doing was preparing food, and it suffused the air with an incredible smell that made them almost not care what the hunk of meat he was butchering actually came from. Almost. Every so often he'd give them a different utensil, tell them to stir something else, or grab an ingredient from a cabinet, or swap the pans around in the oven. He very obviously enjoyed cooking, wearing the most calm look on his face than they'd seen ever, and was keeping his word to Chopper, giving Nell the lightest duty tasks that he could think of. If Nell were anywhere else, they'd say it was enjoyable. That was, until Blackleg sighed and said, apropos of nothing, you're like Iva, right? Iva what? They looked at him. He was doing exactly what he'd been the last time they'd glanced over. But for some reason he was tense, with lines in his back that suggested that he was immensely uncomfortable with what he was asking. You know, Iva? Ivankov? Ivan? Something clicked. Emporio Ivankov? The revolutionary? Yes, Emporio Ivankov. Is there any other Iva? He rolled his eye at them and DMN him. I am not a FING revolutionary. You kidnapped me. They waved the spoon still in their hand at him, taking a step back, like the idea of revolting against the world government was contagious. I am aware of that, Marine. He snatched the spoon out of their hand before they could spray rice everywhere. I meant the other way. What other way? He still had that tenseness to him and it was sending nerves skittering down their spine. FING, really? He swiped at his face. Are you really gonna make me spell it out for you? Seeing as I have no DMN clue how I could be compared to Emporio Ivankov, yes I am. In the back of their mind, Nell was shocked at how much they'd been able to literally yell at Blackleg with no recourse. But that hadn't truly hit yet. And neither had he, which was nice, if nothing else. You know, he said, waving his hand at nothing. Like how they can switch. Switch? Switch WH. An idea snapped into place and Nell had to stop themselves from bursting out laughing. No matter how permissive he'd been, no man liked being laughed at. They bit their lip. Are you asking if I'm a man? Or a woman? Or like, both? He grimaced again and Nell had to bite their cheek, recognizing the discomfort of someone trying to politely ask a question on a subject they were deeply unfamiliar with. It was entirely too endearing a line of questioning from a murderous pirate, which is a thought that they pushed away hard. They turned away from him, to give him some semblance of dignity and to keep themselves from laughing at his awkward face. He sighed a little. To answer your question, no. I'm not a man. Or a woman. They figured they ought to keep it simple. He obviously knew Emporio Ivankov well enough to be able to call them Iva, which was terrifying. Wasn't their connection to the revolutionaries through Strawhat's biological father? Yet not well enough to have been given any real lessons on queerness, which they begrudgingly admitted was Ivankov's area of expertise. I'm neither. Neither, he parroted, moving the word in his mouth like he was tasting it. So you're definitely not a woman. Definitely. They held out their hand. Can I have the spoon back? Teach and distract, keep people that might dislike specific information from being able to react immediately. It was a familiar maneuver they used a lot with Nice. Blackleg's mouth opened a little, like he wanted to say something more, but he plopped the handle of the spoon in Nell's hand and turned away without another word, going back to the massive hunk of meat on a butcher block. For a moment, Nell considered, head spinning. They yelled at him. Yelled and argued and waved what could very generously be called a weapon at him. Just raising their voice would have gotten them punished back on the ship, combined with active disobeying? They would have been lucky to get out of it without getting whipped. But Blackleg, known and noted powerful a-hole pirate, just glared and scoffed and rolled his eyes. He didn't even touch them when he took the spoon, just grabbed it by the scoop and coated his hand in sauce. He'd asked them a question and listened to their answer. It gave them far too much nerve. I wanted to ask you something as well, they said and watched for his reaction. All he did was glare from the corner of his eye. Fine, he said. What? As you know, there's a rumor that's been gaining traction recently. About you. The more they spoke, the more the adrenaline left them and the more they wanted to stop talking. There's a lot of rumors about me, Marine. Yes. But this one specifically was, concerning me. He rolled his eye again, and some of the righteous anger refilled them. Spit it the F out. Fine, they said. Are you a FING cannibal? They'd like to know what they needed to repent for before they died. Blackleg scoffed like a teenager, eye going skyward. Sticking the knife into the meat with a wet schlock, he turned towards them, hands on his hips. This, he pointed towards the meat, is Sea King. Not fishman, not giant, not mink, and not FING human. I don't even know where that rumor came from. Like, what do you Marines think, cannibalism's FING hereditary? What, they tried, but he was on a roll. Do you even know how many diseases you'd get from human meat? Too many. Not even touching the fact that I need dozens of pounds per week just to feed Luffy. It'd just be impractical. Nell took a step back as he flung his arms out, dodging his wild gestures and ignoring their pounding heart. No, I'm not a cannibal. Does that answer your question, Marine? A beat of silence. Nell. What? My name is Nell. They stepped forward, squaring up against him. Something had snapped and they were sick of being scared. And excuse me for thinking that the pirate chef that constantly threatens to cook people might be a cannibal. Sorry for thinking bad of you, one of the pirates that kidnapped me. I'll be sure to keep the logistics of feeding an emperor in mind the next time I'm hostage. Their hands shook with rage as they stared him down, the nails digging into their palms from how tightly they were clenched. They were panting slightly, a fine tremor running down their spine. Blackleg just stood there, staring back, eye wide and face red. They braced for his response, knowing in their bones that whatever he did would be worth having actually been heard. They'd said what they'd wanted to say. That was enough. Before Blackleg could open his mouth or raise his fist or his steel toe, the door behind them burst open. And the galley was filled with a loud, wheedling voice that dumped a bucket of ice over their fuming head. Sanji, Strawhat said, I'm hungry. Blackleg's gaze flicked from Nell to Strawhat, peeking around where they'd been frozen to the deck. His mouth pulled into a thin line as he looked between them, eyes swapping back and forth. He was considering something. They were dead. It's not dinner yet, you shitty glutton, he said, stepping around Nell to grab something from the counter behind them. But Semir, I gotta talk to you. They couldn't look. Strawhat hummed slightly as Blackleg disappeared from their peripheral vision. Their grip on the spoon tightened to a point where they could hear the wood cracking. Come on, Sanji, just a snack, Strawhat pleaded. Just a little, hey! We need to talk, Blackleg said, and there was the sound of something being dragged. Nell closed their eyes. They nearly jumped out of their DMN skin when the bang of the door closing echoed through the galley. They twisted quick, letting out an embarrassing little squeak and brandishing their broken spoon at the noise. There was nobody there. Their eyes swept the galley. The door was closed, the couch was empty, the chairs were empty, the counter was empty. There was the soft sound of voices floating in from outside, too low to make out any true words. They were alone. Alive. Nell collapsed into a pile of limbs on the floor, leaning their head against the door of the warm oven. The spoon fell from their limp grip in two distinct pieces. Their legs were tangled underneath them, painfully twisted. They started laughing. They couldn't stop laughing. Their chest hurt, their head ached, and there were tears streaming down their burning hot face. What the F dash? How did they just keep surviving? First they should have died on their ship, killed by the Commodore for their disobedience and borderline mutiny. Then they should have died the instant they'd given the rest of their information to Devil Child on the Commodore's power, tossed overboard for being useless. Then they should have died the instant they came eye to eye with Demon Hunter, for the crime of being in his way. But no. They survived long enough for Blackleg to not only make them comfortable on a pirate ship, but to gather enough pent-up rage and fear to yell at him. And instead of killing them himself or tattling to his captain, he just left them alone. Untouched. Alive. They stayed there for long enough that the door opened again, slowly with a small creak. Nell couldn't even find the energy in themselves to turn their head. They were curled into an upright fetal position, arms around their knees and eyes staring into nothing. They just wanted to stop guessing. They just wanted to stop being scared. Their vision was filled with a face, dark eyes, black hair, curved scar. Strawhat Luffy was crouched in front of them and they didn't even flinch. It wouldn't do anything anyway. Oi, Belle, he said, leaning in to tap them on the cheek. That woke them enough to blink, but only just. Why wouldn't any of these pirates just get it over with? Your captain hurt you? They nodded. They didn't even want to try to understand what was going through his mind. Okay, he said, nodding once. Next time I see him, I'm gonna kick his butt. Wadash, they tried to say, but he was up and gone before they could even get a word out. The sound of heavy footsteps distracted them from the absolute insanity that was being around Strawhat Luffy. Blackleg was in front of them, bending to grab the remains of the broken spoon and holding out his free hand. Without allowing themselves to overthink it, because what good had that gotten them so far, they took his hand. They were pulled to their feet as if they weighed nothing and a whisk was pressed into their palm. Listen, Nell, he said, pointer finger poking into their sternum. That risotto burns and you're eating all of it. Got it. They were flooded with the urge to laugh. Apparently, they had one person. One capricious, blunt a-hole that didn't lay a hand on them and listened when they spoke. One chef that was definitely not a cannibal. What the hell had their life become? They smiled. Got it. What else could they do? For a solid 5 minutes after Nami and Luffy left him alone again, Usopp stared into nothing. In theory, he could have said he was listening for something, or feeling the waves, or cataloging the meds on the counter across the room, but why lie to himself? He was staring at nothing. His entire world had gotten flipped upside down and turned inside out by a weird man made of rubber, and he needed a minute. He needed to not think. Thinking was dangerous. Thinking was what got him into this mess in the first place, probably. Thinking would lead to analyzing, and analyzing to questioning, and questioning to doubting, and it was just better to be avoided if he could. Thinking would make him scared again, and he was so tired of being scared all the time. And besides, what did he have to be afraid of anyway? So much, all the time, forever. He was Luffy's friend. Was Luffy scary? Yes. Looking at him felt like staring down a lion. But he was his friend. And that had to count for something. It just had to. Damn it, he started thinking again. Usopp shook his head, trying to dislodge the thoughts. That didn't do anything. He closed his eyes, focusing on the face that Luffy gave him, on the feeling that washed over him. Like warm sunshine on the first day of spring. Yeah, alright, that could work. He gripped that feeling tight and took a deep breath. When he blew out, the wind whistled through his teeth. It was fine. He was fine. Luffy was insane and incredible and the weirdest dude he'd ever met, and rubber? Apparently? But it was all going to be fine. Because knew his dad and he was his friend. Usopp shied away from the feeling that burbled up when he thought about Luffy knowing his dad. About his dad knowing Luffy. He was proud that his dad was following his calling of being a brave pirate. That was enough. Pushing the tray of half-eaten food out of the way, Usopp slumped over and put his head in his hands. All right, he said to Noon, because there was nobody there to listen to him be crazy. Time to take stock. I'm on a ship with a bunch of pirates. I'm friends with one of the pirates. That pirate knows my dad. The rest of the pirates know me, and Nell said that I'm safe. I told the pirates that I could lead them to some crazy treasure, and then I got myself hurt, and now I don't know what I told them or even what they actually want, and I'm here alone, and Nell won't tell me where I am, and Nell's not here, and... He stopped himself with a clack of teeth and a hand slapped over his mouth. Sees, he was such an idiot. When did talking about it ever help him? Before he could even calm down his shuddering breath, there was a knock on the door. He jumped, the movement making a twinge zing down his spine. Usopp, a soft voice called. May I come in? Not Luffy. Not Nell. Not Nami or the cook or the reindeer. Part of him was relieved that he wouldn't have to face the scary crew members again yet, but most of him was just scared of what this one would be like. Didn't Nami say there were others with the freaky powers on the crew? What if this person was even creepier? Though he wasn't sure what could be worse than a dude with rubber for bones and skin and everything else. Another soft knock floated through the room. I can come back later if you would prefer, they said. Though, I wanted to warn you that Chopper is planning on coming in soon for your checkup, so if you have a grievous wound, you only have a few minutes left to foolishly hide it. What? He said. Oh shit, were they catching on to his lying? Come in. The door opened slowly and in walked one of the most gorgeous women he had ever laid eyes on. She was tall and willowy, with bright blue eyes, a prominent nose, and long silky black hair. When she moved, her long brightly colored skirt flowed behind her like water. There was a moment that Usopp just couldn't talk because he was absolutely struck dumb by her. She looked over at him, met his eyes, and gave him a small smile. But there was something else about her. Something odd. He could feel it in the back of his mind when she caught his gaze. Something uncanny. But then she pulled over a chair and sat by his bedside, and he couldn't help but wait with bated breath for whatever she said. Thank you, Usopp, she said, and his heart stuttered. It's good to see you up and moving. My name is Robin. She held out a hand to shake. Her grip was firm and her palm was covered in thick calluses. It's nice to meet you. Oh, we know each other. But yes, it is nice to see you. Her smile was wider and showed the tiniest flash of teeth. I come bearing gifts as well. Before Usopp could ask or even wonder what that meant, she spread 3 books out in his lap. One was a heavy-looking history book, another was a book with a big cloud on the cover, and the last was obviously a romance. Usopp picked up the one with the cloud first, making sure his hand did not move even close to the romance. Ah, yes, Robin said. The Adventures of Nolan the Liar. That is a very good choice. She leaned in to flip open to a seemingly random page and point at notes in the margins. I've amended it some to reflect new information. I'm sure you'll enjoy it. Thank you, Usopp said because he didn't know what else to say. And you're welcome to keep these with you as well. She stacked the books on the bedside table. Books are the greatest defense we have against boredom, you know. She winked at him, like he was in on some kind of joke. Sure. He kept having to look away from her sharp-eyed stare. Damn it, and he thought Nami was nerve-wracking to be around. This woman looked like she could dissect him. Could I ask you a question? Of course, Usopp. Anything. She really sounded like she meant that. What are you doing here? He wasn't going to get hurt. He was Luffy's friend. That had to mean something. Here in the room with you? He nodded, still looking away. Because I wanted to check on you. Robin leaned forward, propping her elbow on the edge of the bed and putting her jaw in her hand. And the little Marine is busy, so I thought I'd keep you company with your doctor's appointment. Nell? What's Nell doing? He looked at her then. Nell seemed so scared earlier, what could they be busy with? They were the only one on the ship that he could be pretty sure wasn't lying to him. Why weren't they there? Was it him? Was it always him? Currently they are giving Sanji a piece of their mind. She smirked. Very deserving, I may add. I love that man, but he still has some learning to do. Usopp gaped at her. They're yelling? At the cook? No. Not anymore. Her eyes unfocused for a second and Usopp strained his ears to listen for what she must have been hearing. All he could hear was the lap of waves and the creak of the hull. Now they're talking to Luffy. Usopp unwound. Honest or not, Nell had to have been wrong about Luffy. He was too nice to be afraid of past the whole inhuman rubber creature thing. He'd be nice to them. Oh, he said. Good. Is it? There was the tiniest note of surprise in her voice but the little smile didn't slip. Yeah, Usopp nodded. Luffy's nice. He is, isn't he? Something about the way she spoke seemed softer than anything else she'd said. She must have really liked Luffy too. Is he your friend? He asked before he could think better of it. He is, she said. Her smile got a little wider. And yours, though I'm sure he made that abundantly clear. Usopp nodded. He fell silent after that, for once at a loss of what to say. Robin was just too steady. Like nothing could shake her. Not that he wanted to shake her, of course. It just made keeping a conversation hard. With Luffy, talking was easy. He'd hung off of Usopp's every word like it was gold. Robin listened too, but it felt more like she was calculating something. It was terrifying. But she was Luffy's friend. Hey! She hummed and he made himself not back down. Can I ask you a question? Anything, Usopp. Oh sees, she sounded like she meant that. She must have been a better liar than he was. Not that it was that hard. It was going to SCK trying to figure out what was true or not. What, was he doing there? Did they want from him? Was Nell there for? Happened to him? What's a devil fruit? She sat up straight and looked off into the distance with a hand over her mouth. Ah, she said. I see. Luffy gave a demonstration, did he? I guess, Usopp admitted. But I'm still not sure what it is. Because he wasn't man enough to handle seeing something that extraordinary. Creepy. It was so creepy. Alright. Where do I start? She tapped her chin. On a very literal level, a devil fruit is a kind of unique fruit that, once eaten, imbues the person with a specific ability. There is only one of each fruit in the world at once and no two abilities are the same, even if they have similar properties. And Luffy? He said he was a rubberman. Yes, the gum fruit. It is my understanding that he ate the fruit as a child and obtained all of the properties of rubber. For all intents and purposes, he is made of rubber. And do all of these fruits do that? Make you into something else? No, but some of them do. I won't go into the specifics of how they're categorized because it can get needlessly confusing, but just know that if there's a power you can imagine, there is probably a devil fruit to match. Usopp's head was absolutely FING spinning. So, what? Turn invisible? Yes. Heal people? Yes. Fly? To my knowledge, there's no fruit that's specific to flying, but many powers come with that ability. Fine, okay. Transform into something? That is an entire category. We even have one on the ship. Oh, shit, that was right. The freaky little reindeer guy. He must have been one of the, what did Nami say? 3 people besides Luffy that had those powers. 3 other people with powers that defied any possible reason. What the hell were they going to be like? The reindeer, right? Did he eat some kind of deer fruit or something? Almost, but not quite. She seemed so pleased, for some wild reason. Maybe she was the deer's friend too? Oh sees, they were probably all the deer's friends. He was going to have to get used to being around a walking, talking deer that for some reason liked looking more like a deer than a man. He was a reindeer first, who then ate the human fruit. Wait. What? Yes, I know. Fascinating, isn't it? Not the word Usopp used, but okay. There are abilities that range from slowing things down to turning into all manner of animals to becoming light and controlling gravity. But it just so happens that a reindeer was the one to eat the one fruit that would do absolutely nothing for any human besides making them unable to swim. Did you say controlling gravity? Usopp tried to keep the panic out of his voice but he didn't think he was very good at it. Robin nodded. Yes. As far as I know, it is currently being wielded by a naval admiral, she said, and Usopp got the idea that there was more she could have said about it but was holding back for some reason. He really hoped it was because she wanted to spare him the panic rather than something scarier like actually he couldn't really think of any other reason she wouldn't tell him something. Maybe try to manipulate him? She seemed like someone that would be good at manipulating. Usopp slowly realized that it had been a few moments since she answered his question and he hadn't spoken since. The infirmary was silent and awkward, but Robin just sat next to him placidly, looking at him with that DMN smile. So, he said, unwilling to let the silence drag. Have you ever heard about the island in the sky? Her eyes lit up and Usopp's heart lifted. Maybe she wasn't so scary if she liked his stories. Maybe that was a requirement for Luffy's friends. The island in the sky, huh? Can't say I've heard of that one. Well, alright, Usopp started and swept his arms in a big motion that he was surprised did very little to worsen the ache in his neck. So, one day, me and my crew, I'm a captain, of course. Of course, Robin nodded. Yeah, so me and my crew, bored and ready for adventure, come across this shipwreck. But we don't just stumble upon it, why see? It stumbles on us. The words tumble out as easy as any story he'd said since he woke up on the ridiculous ship. This massive galleon 100 feet from prow to stern fell out of the sky and nearly capsized us in the process. My eyes nearly bugged out of my head in shock, but I, like all good captains, kept my senses and led my crew to safety. Of course, once the waves stopped sloshing us around, I in my captainly wisdom decided that we were going to plumb the wreckage. Best to make a good thing out of an almost bad situation, as I always say. But instead of gold and treasure, we quickly found evidence that this ship was not just thrown by some errant waterspout, but tossed off of an island thousands of feet in the air, for the crime of trespassing. Oh my! What did you do then? Well, we retraced their footsteps, of course. No way in all the seas were we going to pass up the opportunity to go into the sky. It would go against my pride as a pirate and a brave warrior. A knock on the door cut him off. He swallowed quick to keep from choking on the words. Usopp? It's Chopper, I'm here to check on you. Can I come in? Usopp was frozen stiff. The rest of the story died in his throat as his mind went completely, embarrassingly blank. He knew Robin was staring at him, but he couldn't find the strength to move. I'm the doctor. He was frozen for another long second before Robin laid a hand on his shoulder in a gesture that seemed familiar somehow. He felt like he ought to have jumped from her touch, but something inside him unwound instead. She'd been so nice. Intimidating beyond all reason, but nice. Usopp, I know you're afraid. He wanted to deny it, but he still couldn't move his jaw. But Chopper is not going to hurt you. He wants to help. Robin's eyes were wide and deep and a beautiful, bright blue that felt so comforting that he was almost reminded of home. Are you sure? He stuttered. More sure than I have been with anything. Robin couldn't have been more different from home. She was tall and strong to Kaya's short and frail. She was older, with the tan skin of someone that spent ages in the sun. Her eyes were sharply, terrifyingly intelligent. She lied, easily and expertly. But something about her, something Usopp couldn't put his finger on, made him want to trust her. He tried to talk and then found that his jaw still didn't want to work, so he nodded instead. She was Luffy's friend. He needed to trust that. What else could he do? Come in, Chopper, she said in his place. The door latch clicked and Usopp could hear the clop-clop of FING hooves on wood, and he almost lost what little amount of nerve he'd worked up. Robin. I didn't know you'd be in here. The dear, Chopper, he should call him Chopper. Oh sees, how did the doctor get the name Chopper? Exclaimed. No, dumbass, Usopp reminded himself quickly. Nell said it was his name before he was a doctor. Robin took one of Usopp's hands and gave it a little squeeze before reaching down and patting Chopper on the head between his antlers. Sheet, what was his life becoming? Were all pirate crews like that? Thought I'd keep Usopp company, since the little marine is occupied right now, she said. Oh yeah. They're helping Sanji with dinner. And how are they doing? Good. They let me do a checkup, too. No complications from anything, and Sanji said he'd keep their work light. He gave Robin a look. He's not working them too hard, right? Not at all. One-handed jobs only, stirring and whisking and the like. Okay, good. He smiled, and Usopp was forced to admit to himself that the little dear was actually kinda cute, in a terrifying sort of way. Kinda weird that he asked Robin about Nell, though, since she'd been in there for half the time that Nell had been gone. But he, like everybody else on the DMN ship, probably knew something that Usopp didn't. I didn't think so, but you know how Sanji can be. I certainly do. But don't worry, I think they're getting along, as much as Sanji can admit. Chopper giggled. And Luffy likes them, too. Oh good. Did you know that they refused? He petered off with a glance in Usopp's direction that made him stiffen more than he thought possible and sent a shooting pain back down his spine. I mean, I'll tell you later. I know what you're talking about. Chopper perked up. It was impressive. But, not what you're here for, correct? Right, you're right. He waved her hand off of his hat and turned to Usopp. So, how are you feeling? Did you eat? Are you nauseous or anything? Sanji said you were in pain earlier, how's that feeling? The barrage of questions felt like a hailstorm to Usopp's battered brain, absolutely unhelped by the crazy face that was asking it. Maybe he was asleep. Maybe he was in a coma. That would certainly explain everything better than crazy pirate ship with reindeer doctor just exists in the world. Usopp? Chopper asked. His voice was hesitant and he took a step closer. Usopp flinched. Oh. Okay. He clenched his little hoof hands and seemed to steel himself, which was terrifying. Listen, Usopp, I know you don't want to do this right now and I know you don't remember me, but I just want to help. Please just let me help. And damn it, but he looked at Usopp with the biggest, roundest, saddest eyes that he'd ever seen. They cut straight through the fear that didn't want to leave him right to the part of his brain that cooed over babies and made him give cream to the barn kittens. He was just too cute. And there was something else. Something like how it felt when Robin gripped his shoulder. Something like the warmth in his chest that bloomed when Luffy said he was his friend. Something he didn't understand but wasn't willing to push away completely. Usopp chewed on his lip. And nodded. Chopper's face lit up entirely and the wide, squinty smile he gave him nearly made the rest of his apprehension melt away. He was like Luffy. He had the same kind of powers, though probably different categories if he understood Robin right. The human fruit. He could deal with that. Probably. Great. Chopper chirped and bounced from foot to foot. Now, most important, how are you feeling? Are you in pain right now? He muttered, considering. Kinda? But less than before. How less? I was super stiff earlier, I think. I couldn't really bend my neck at all or even move much without it hurting. He puffed out his chest and found a ridiculous kind of comfort in the performance. Guess I'm just too tough to keep down for long, eh? Chopper giggled again and nodded before moving on. He was given another battery of questions, slower though, and the more he talked, the less he could feel the fear choking him. Chopper was a freaky monster, that he was sure of. But he was also a doctor and obviously good at his job and was very invested in Usopp being okay. And young. There was no doubt in Usopp's mind that Chopper was young, no matter the skill he obviously had with medicine. Between his mannerisms, those big eyes, and the indulgent way that Robin looked at him, Usopp'd be shocked if he was older than him. He almost reminded him of his little band of pirates back home. DMN, he missed them. He hoped they weren't too worried about him. There a reason why you didn't finish your food? Nausea or lack of appetite? Robin had picked up the tray at Chopper's request and placed it on the floor so that he could look at it. Lack of appetite, I guess? Just not really too hungry. Alright. You did just wake up recently so it may just be a transient thing as your body readjusts, but let's keep an eye on that, he said and hopped up on the spinning chair next to the desk to scribble something down. Usopp wondered how he held a pen with his little hoof. Anyway, moving on. Do you think you could stand up and walk a couple steps? If you don't think so, please don't try, I don't want to have to deal with you passing out again. At the mention of standing, Usopp suddenly realized just how restless he'd gotten. When he was still stiff and in pain, it was easy to ignore how much he wanted to move because moving hurting, but since he was barely aching anymore it felt more like there were ants crawling under his skin. He needed to move. No, I can stand, he said. Bracing his arms on either side of him, Usopp swung his legs over the side and narrowly missed swiping Robin on the side. Wait, Chopper said. Usopp stopped. Just take it slow. I know you get restless but please, you don't want to fall. I won't fall, Usopp said with a confidence he didn't feel. Robin was at his side anyway with one arm floating around his shoulders in case he tried to pitch any which way. I am the great Captain Usopp and Captain Usopp doesn't fall. Why one time I was standing atop a building a foot wide positioned over a massive sinkhole in the middle of the ocean. During an earthquake. If I didn't fall then, I won't be falling now. He'd thought that Chopper would be charmed or interested in his tales of Captain Usopp, the man he desperately wanted to be, and never would become, but instead it just made his face crack from the stern professionalism he'd been sporting. For just a second, he looked absolutely devastated and Usopp had no clue why. I know. Just still be careful, okay? Usopp nodded, not sure exactly what he could say that wouldn't make Chopper's sharp pain even worse. Standing slow, he looked down at his lower half for the first time since he'd woken up. His feet were bare, but he was wearing a pair of soft sweatpants and a loose t-shirt that were big in just the right way to make them comfortable. As he got to his feet, his hair fell into his face and a sharp zing of pain ran its way up every vertebra of his spine and made him hiss and Chopper wince, but it faded just as fast. "See?" he said, pushing his hair out of his face. There was something strange about his hair that he couldn't exactly put a finger on, but he ignored it for the minute. Bigger fish to fry. All good. Chopper's smile was shaky. Good. Now can you take a couple steps? And there was the challenge. He could stand, sure, but could he walk? Or would he fall immediately and all the pain that had faded would come rushing back to him and he'd fall back into a days-long coma and forget everything that he'd been trying so hard to remember? He lifted his foot and took one shaky step forward. And then another. And another. Robin was by his side, a shadow with a hand hovering close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating off it. He couldn't help but feel comforted by her continued care, if not also incredibly confused by it. There. What did I say? Nothing can keep the great Captain Usopp down for long. His confidence raised as he took more and more steps. By the time he was turning around at the end of the room, he wasn't even wobbling anymore. Which was, of course, when he saw the other guy on the other side of the room and started so hard he would have fallen on his but if not for Robin's hand behind his back. "Sheet," he yelped, regaining his balance and trying not to wince too much from the spike of pain going down his neck. "Who the hell is that?" "Usopp." Chopper clattered over and was at his hip in an instant. He was very proud of how he didn't flinch away from his grasping hooves. "Are you all right? Was it the pain? Are you dizzy at all?" No, I'm fine. That dude just surprised me, is all." Usopp turned to Chopper to assure him that everything was actually fine and he didn't need to be that close to him. "No thank you." "What dude?" Chopper asked. Usopp's brain came to a screeching halt. Did he missee? Was he hallucinating? "That dude." Usopp pointed, trying not to be as frantic as he felt. As he looked back up, the guy was pointing back at him. He was stocky and buff, with deep brown skin and long curly hair halfway to an afro. His forearms were toned enough that Usopp could see the line of the muscle in them and there were more than a couple thin, silver scars across them. He was cool-looking and strong and was standing with Robin at his back and Chopper at his side. And was matching Usopp's movements perfectly. And had a long, prominent nose. "What?" he started and then saw the other guy's lips move in time and clacked his jaw shut. He looked down at himself. Nothing felt different, other than the pain. He didn't feel like he ought to look like that. He didn't feel cool and buff and badass looking. He just felt, like himself. Lame, a loser, a lanky little coward that couldn't do anything but run and hide. He looked up and took a step forward. The other guy, his reflection, it had to be, moved with him. Another step and he was within arm's reach. He held out a hand. His fingertips touched cool, smooth glass instead of warm flesh. "Hey, Robin?" Usopp tried. "Yes? Can devil fruits make you look different than you should?" "There is one that allows the user to shapeshift into another person, but none that let the user change the appearance of others." Her expression was soft and sympathetic in the reflection. Because he could still see her. Because it was a reflection. So that is you, yes. That is what you look like." She stepped up beside him and placed a warm hand on the bicep of his still outstretched arm. He flexed without realizing it and the muscle stood out even more. "I look," he said and stopped. "Yeah?" Chopper prompted. "I look like my dad." Oh, sees, he'd been trying to keep away from that little tidbit of information, trying to hold back on thinking any more about his dad when he was who knew how far from home. But really, he did. Give him some locks and take off the nose and he'd be the spitting DMN image, even if he only went by the hazy memories of his last visit when he was barely big enough to hold a slingshot. I mean, I don't. What I saying? Are you feeling okay, Usopp? Chopper asked and took a step closer. Maybe you should go sit down again. Yeah, he said. Yeah, maybe I should. He was led back to the bed in a daze and sat on the edge, staring at his hands. They were bigger than he remembered, with thick calluses on his palms and fingertips and thin, old scars along the backs. He flexed and unflexed them, trying to feel differences. He made a fist and the muscle of his arm carved a line down the back of it. He'd never had muscles big enough to see before. What the hell was happening? How about you tell me how you're feeling right now? Chopper asked. Confused, Usopp said immediately. Okay. But not bad though, right? Not dizzy or hurting or feeling like you're going to pass out. He shook his head and gave himself a little spark of pain down his spine. A little pain. None of the other stuff. He huffed and released the fists he'd made. Why do I look like this? Like WH? Chopper started but Robin put a hand on his head to stop him. She crouched in front of him, folding herself down so that she could look him in the eye even as he hunched over. "You're missing time, Usopp. Your memories of developing into the person you are today are blocked off. Not gone, not lost completely. Just inaccessible." She held one of his hands in a loose grip. "You will remember what you have lost, but in the meantime, please trust that this is who you are." Usopp fought around the chunk of emotion that had lodged itself in his throat. How? Dedication, training, and a truly commendable amount of self-control. "You worked very hard to get to where you are today," she said, and the little smile returned. "You've earned looking like a badass." Usopp laughed. It was a choked-off, ugly sound, but at least it made him feel a little better. He had no idea why Robin cared enough to want to make him feel better, but he figured he wouldn't look a gift ship in the sale. Nothing else made sense since waking up, so why should she? "How much?" He cleared his throat. "How much time did I lose?" "Enough," she said. "Of course." Back to the cryptic answers from everybody on the DMN boat. Maybe she'd talked to Nell, gotten a crash course in kind of answering questions. Or maybe it was the other way around. Usopp didn't know anything about the ship he was on, but he got the feeling that a marine was not a common fixture. They were pirates, they were absolutely pirates, and he genuinely didn't know what to feel about that, and like hell was he gonna poke that moon bear. "Okay," he allowed. "What happens now?" He glanced over towards Chopper, who was still standing just out of arm's reach, shifting foot to foot. He perked up when Usopp looked at him, which was entirely too cute to handle. "Oh, I can help with that." Chopper hopped over and pulled a stool out from under the bed Usopp was sitting on. "I just want to finish my evaluation and then you can get some more rest. I'm sure you're tired." Usopp nodded, not willing to argue with him, even if the thought of laying down and closing his eyes filled him with equal amounts desire and dread. He had no DMN clue what his dreams would be like when he went to sleep, and he was not in any mood to find out. "Plus, as long as I can see that you can swallow without problems, then I can let you eat solid foods. Sanji's making a cobbler from some of the fresh fruit we got on the last island, and I know how much you like that." Chopper said, and climbed up onto the stool so that he was almost eye to eye with Usopp. Did he? Because he was right, fresh warm fruit cobbler sounded amazing and he could probably eat a whole pan right then. But how did Chopper know that? Plus the cook earlier, he'd said, "You love fish stew," with so much confidence, and had been right. What the hell did that mean? What did any of it mean? "They know you, dumbass," he thought. "Like Nami said, you have history." Apparently enough history to know why he was suddenly buff and know his dad and know his goddamn food preferences. "So?" Chopper said, and made him startle a little bit. "Again. Is that all right?" "Yeah," he said quickly. "Better to just get it over with." "Yeah, let's do this." "Great." Chopper chirped. "Now please hold your arms out for me, palms up." The rest of the checkup continued without fanfare. Chopper asked him to do something, he'd do it, and he'd have Robin write something medical down like strength intact or negative intention tremor. Usopp had to suppress a shiver when Chopper finally put his hooves on him, but at least he'd been prepared for it. They felt like hooves, which was almost anticlimactic compared to what he'd been half expecting. Among other things, lights were shined in his eyes. He stood up, bent over, and stood on either foot, drank water, and Chopper felt down the entire length of his spine. The most upsetting part of it was truthfully when he'd had to take off his shirt so that Chopper could check his back, and he glanced down to his chest and stomach. His toned, scar-covered chest and stomach. Chopper said when he saw and made Usopp's heart jump into his throat. "You might be a little dehydrated. I'll get you some more water before I leave." Usopp nodded, not willing to try to open his mouth because it'd probably just be squeaks instead of words. By the time that Chopper was done, Usopp was actually ready to sleep, nightmares or no. Better to close his eyes and not have to deal with the craziness than anything else. Maybe if he was lucky he could just sleep through all the amnesia. Or he'd close his eyes and the next time he woke up he'd be back home in his bed in syrup with a new crazy story for Kaya. She'd definitely appreciate badass, lady pirates. "Alright," Chopper said after an amount of time that Usopp had no idea how to quantify. The shadows were longer, that was a definite. "Everything looks great. As long as you're feeling good, I don't see any reason why you can't eat regular food. Just, be careful if you're walking around. You're not injured besides some bruising and you're healing like normal, but I just don't want to risk another fall. And definitely have someone get me if you start feeling sick or pain or anything weird, okay? Sound good?" "Sounds good," he nodded and tried not to look Chopper in his big, sad eyes. He still didn't entirely understand why he was so afraid of him falling, but chalk that one up to any of the other dozen things he didn't understand. He was almost getting used to it. "Do you," Chopper said, "need anything else?" "Nope," he said. Robin looked at him a little weird, but that wasn't new either, so he ignored it. "Thanks, Chop. Where did that come from?" He almost apologized for the nickname, but he caught sight of Chopper hopping a little with the happiest look on his face and had to keep himself from cooing at the sight of it. He was adorable, and it was kinda disconcerting to go from terrified to endeared in such a short time. But well, just like Luffy and Robin, no matter what else about him, he was just so nice. It was hard being afraid of someone that nice. "No problem," he said. "Remember, get me if you need anything." And then he was gone. And Usopp was alone with Robin, who was gathering up the remnants of food on his tray and heading towards the door as well. "And Usopp," she said, looking back at him with that incomprehensible smile. "It's good to see you feeling better. You scared us for a little while there." "Oh, yeah?" he asked. "Sorry about that." She shook her head and her long hair shifted like a curtain around her face. "Not your fault, so no apology needed. Just focus on feeling better. And get some rest." She looked off into the distance for a moment. "The little Marine ought to be back in here in a few minutes. They'll bring dinner." Usopp nodded. He wasn't sure what else he could do. Robin left a moment later and he was alone again. Alone. On a pirate ship. Looking like his dad. He flopped down into the bed and was distantly pleased to feel only the slightest twinge from the movement. Throwing his arm, his buff arm, over his eyes, he resigned himself to an unknown amount of days of absolutely incomprehensible bullshit interspersed with some very nice, very confusing people. He could deal with that. He could deal with it better if he knew more about the time he lost. Or how much time he lost. Or how long he would be without it. Or where they were. Or who they were. Or why he was there. Or whether or not he told them that he could lead them to some specific treasure. But oh well. Nobody wanted to give that information. So he'd deal. Another unknown amount of time later, the door opened again. He peeked out from under his arm and saw the tall, blue-haired form of Nell backing into the room with a tray balanced on their good arm. Usopp couldn't help but feel a little more relaxed. Nell was nice. Everybody seemed nice, but Nell didn't hold his memory loss against him, a little like Luffy. They didn't act like every word he said was some sort of loss or betrayal. But Luffy was his friend, so what was their excuse? "Hey," he said. They looked at him as they maneuvered in. "Do I know you?" Their eyes widened to an insane degree and they went so pale that Usopp could count their freckles. "Oh, sheet, do you not remember me?" "Oh, if you're losing more than I've got no clue." Usopp sat up quick and was surprised at how easy it was to do. No, I do. "You're Nell," he assured them. They deflated quickly with a hand to their chest. "I just meant, am I supposed to know you and forgot?" They all but fell into Chopper's chair after putting down the food. The poof of air made the smell waft over to him and it smelled amazing. He wasn't able to enjoy what he'd been eating before because of the fear that made everything taste like ash, but since that had faded, he was looking forward to the cook's food. "Oh, thank the seas," they breathed. "No, you don't know me. Up until yesterday, we were complete strangers." "And what happened yesterday?" Usopp tried. Nell squinted at him. "You got hurt," they said before turning away. "Now, let's eat before it gets cold." "Damn it, no dice." Usopp watched as Nell puttered around and put both their meals together, his on the collapsible side table and theirs on Chopper's desk like their lunch had been. The longer he waited, the more the amazing smell of the food made his stomach growl. It was like any desire for information left him for a desire to eat. "There," Nell said and took their seat. "Now dig in or Sanji'll have my hide." Usopp didn't need to be told twice. His plate was filled to the brim with creamy rice dish topped with some kind of cooked meat, salty capers, and bright green asparagus. There was a giant glass of water next to it and a small bowl of cobbler to the side, deep blue and still steaming. It all looked absolutely fantastic and he had to keep himself from inhaling it because he knew he'd be sick and he didn't want to have to get Chopper so soon after he'd promised he was fine. The rice was incredible. One of the best things he'd eaten probably ever, perfectly salted, meat tender, and still warm. The cobbler was somehow even better, though, and he was all too quickly done with everything on his plate and trying not to feel like his overfull stomach was going to turn into nausea and vomiting everything up. He laid back down with one hand on his stomach and stared at the shifting shadows on the ceiling. They seemed deeper than they should have, but what did he know? He didn't even know what season it was. "Hey, Nell?" It sounded like their mouth was full. Apparently their time with the cook, yelling at the cook, for some reason, made any of their worry about the food disappear. Thank the seas. It tasted too good to be worried about what it was made of, and if they were worried about it, Usopp was sure he'd be too. What season is it? Nice, easy question. He'd definitely be able to get an answer on something that only had 4 possibilities. Nell grimaced and Usopp's hope for at least one certainty plummeted. "I'm not sure," they said after a moment of visible waffling. "How can you not be sure of the season?" "Because we're on the sea, Usopp. It depends. Yeah, sure, on hemisphere, he said, annoyed. One question. He just wanted one question answered. How the hell could you not know what hemisphere of the world we're in? Nell chewed on their lip and Usopp got a very sinking feeling. Nami said something about some of the crew being from the Grand Line. Chopper was from the Grand Line. Where in the world was he? It's a little more complicated than that. I think it's winter right now, how about that? Right now, Usopp repeated. He was suddenly struck by a pure, unfiltered need to be outside. He needed to see for his FING self what the weather was. It's winter right now. Listen, Usopp, I know you. Usopp stood fast and wobbled a little on his feet, cutting them off. They stood with him, arms out. Whoa, be careful. I know. He waved them off and started taking a couple of unsure steps. I need some air. I'll be back in a minute. Hey, wait a minute, I'm not sure that's a very good idea. Their voice was stern but hiding a little bit of panic, which Usopp was very good at picking out because he heard it so much in his own voice. And he was sorry for making them so worried, he was. It was just, he needed to be outside, alright? He needed to know one thing. Just one. Then he'd drop it. He didn't know where he was, who he was, how he looked like a different person, his dad, why he was there, what the others wanted from him, or anything else. He just wanted to know what season it was. It'll be fine, he said, not very confidently but still moving towards the door. Nell was at his side in an instant and he was almost worried that they'd try to physically stop him. They were skinny but damn it were they tall, and Usopp got the idea that there was more to them than what he could just see. But they didn't. I just want to stretch my legs. You can do that in here. You don't have to come with me. Yes, I do, dumbass. What? You get hurt and it's my butt? Really? Why? He used the distraction to open the door and step out. Sheet, alright, fine. They followed him before the door closed. Just make it quick, alright? I don't like the look of the sky. Nell was right, the sky was dark and heavy with clouds, but what really got him was the deck that he just stepped out onto. The low light made things hard to make out entirely, but what in the entire world? Was that grass? And a tree? What kind of ship was it and why did it make something warm and comfortable bloom in his chest? He needed a better look. He followed the walkway to a set of stairs leading to the stern of the boat, trying to get a good look at anything he could before he really lost light. He stumbled a couple steps from the shifting of the waves and felt Nell's hand wrap around his bicep and keep him steady. The stairs were a chore, but by the time he got up to the top of them, his eyes were ready to bug out of his head. That was trees. Orange trees. In the middle of the ocean. What the? Usopp tried and was stopped by a fit of giggles that he just couldn't keep from escaping. Why are there trees here? As far as I understand, they're cat burglars, Nell said and glanced over at him. Nami's. I don't know much else. But why? They remind her of home, a new voice said from behind them, and Usopp stiffened. Incredible, isn't it? To have such a piece of home with you, even here. Usopp watched as Nell turned slowly, their face a frozen mask of indifference, and tried not to let his anxiety ratchet even higher than it had already become. That wasn't a voice he knew. Who the hell was it? Soul King, Nell said, voice flat. My apologies for disturbing you. Not at all, Marine, not at all. The voice had an odd, almost musical quality to it. It's good to see our Usopp up and walking around. Warms the heart. That is, it would if I had one. And that's when his curiosity won over his fear in the fight, keeping him frozen to the spot. Usopp turned slowly, inch by inch, because he needed to see who the new person was. He needed to know who claimed him so easily and happily. Who made Nell, the person that could yell at the cook, scared so stiff. The other person came into view piece by piece, and Usopp instantly regretted ever leaving the infirmary. Regretted everything that he ever did to get him off of the Gecko Islands. Because by all the gods he hated the man he saw standing behind him. He was tall, that much was sure. Very tall, over a head above Nell, and they towered over Usopp. He was dressed in bright colors that almost hurt to look at. He had a massive afro balanced on top of his head. His skull. Because a single glance at his face and Usopp was absolutely, entirely positive that he was actually dead, because that was a FING skeleton. A skeleton, with an afro and bright orange pants and a hot pink feather boa. Usopp wasn't sure if he was even still breathing. Maybe he wasn't because he was dead, because that was the only explanation for the actual living skeleton. Is there anything I can do for you, then? Nell asked the skeleton, the walking, talking skeleton. No, thank you, he said, and his jaw flapped and clacked like bones because he was a skeleton. Just thought I'd take a quick gander. Nearly got scared out of my skin yesterday. Oh wait, I don't have any. And then he laughed, and it was almost haunting and echoed weirdly, and Nell still wasn't budging, and Usopp was staring down a skeleton that knew him. Though if I were the both of you, I'd make my way back inside. Nami says there's a bad storm on the way and you don't want to be caught on deck. Thank you for the warning. We'll do that N. As if on cue, the ship listed to the side from a wave that almost crested over the deck and Usopp's heart was in his DMN throat. First the skeleton, then a storm? What else could go wrong? Sheet. Come on. Nell grabbed his arm and started pulling as the skeleton caught his balance and started spriting for somewhere at the fore of the ship. He vaulted over the railing and his echoey, creepy voice floated back towards where Usopp and Nell were still getting their feet under them. Get inside, both of you. Now. Nell barely waited to be on balance before they were tugging him towards the stairs. The deck went from calm and empty to utter chaos in seconds and left Usopp absolutely reeling. He stumbled down the stairs, gripping the railing with the hand that Nell wasn't pulling on as another wave rocked the boat. They were getting taller. He could feel the cold ocean spray. They hit the lower deck and a door opened in front of them, almost slamming into Nell's face. Out stepped Nami, her hair whipping in the wind that had picked up to gale forces. What the F are you two doing out here? She demanded. Infirmary, now. And they were off again. There were more people scattering onto the deck, more voice raising above the growing noise of wind and surf, but the walk from the stairs to the infirmary door had gotten long and treacherous in seconds and Usopp was using all of his concentration not to end up on his back. First the deck was going up and they were climbing, then it was going down and they were trying not to slide, then it was sideways and they were being slammed into the wall or the railing. It was only thanks to Nell pulling him along that he was able to stay on 2 feet at all. How they were doing it with a broken arm, he had no idea. After an age of climbing and sliding and swallowing his heart as it leapt into his throat, they both made it to the infirmary. Nell kicked the door open and tossed him in and he was finally on his butt and out of the buffeting winds. He breathed a sigh of relief and looked up to see Nell still standing in the doorway, staring outwards. Hey, what are you doing? He shouted at them. Get in here. I think I can help, Nell said, like an insane person. Stay here. But whatever they were going to say was lost. The ship listed starboard for what felt like the 100th time in the past minute and they stumbled. But instead of righting themselves and continuing like they had 100 times before, the wave had finally gained enough momentum to crest over the deck. They only had a second to see it and reach for the doorframe before it was too late. The last thing Usopp saw before the infirmary door was slammed closed by the force of the boat's rocking, was Nell getting swept off their feet by a waist-high surge of water, eyes wide and hand grasping. And then they were gone. Of course. Course. Because nothing can ever go right for me. Nell was utterly furious as they slid their way down the tilting walkway, their cold numb hand failing to find purchase on the slick wood and tumbling so much that they barely knew which way was up. They didn't even have the energy or wherewithal to scream for help, as if that would do anything. They just wished they would have been able to enjoy their last few days. They'd even started hoping that Straw Hat would have Demon Hunter kill them quickly instead of throwing them overboard. But no. Apparently, they were never going to be able to escape their fate. In their tumbling, Nell's broken arm hit something and their mouth opened in a pained scream. The inhale backfired severely as, instead of air, ice-cold seawater filled their lungs. Any attempt to try to cough it out was only met with more water as they breathed in what felt like an ocean's worth. It figured. They weren't even off the ship before they started drowning. Between one moment and the next, Nell went from sliding down a listing deck, grasping at whatever they couldn't reach, to spilling over the side of the ship with the water that carried them away. They seemed to float as they hit open air, the chill on their face making them take a breath and not take in more sea. Then they started to fall. And for the first time since their sister's funeral, they prayed. I pray to the Mother Seas, in their peace and their anger, for their blessings to endure the hardships to come. I pray to the East for her kindness. I pray to the South for her courage. I pray to the West for her wham. Something had grabbed hold of Nell's arm and instead of plummeting to the churning waters below, they near had their good arm pulled out of its socket and slammed into the side of the ship with a force that knocked the minimal amount of breath out of their lungs. They looked up as they dangled, expecting to see a hand attached to a person but instead seeing a disembodied arm growing out of the side of the ship. Nico Robin. In a flurry of petals, another half-dozen arms appeared along the hull, their fingers grasping at Nell, their shirt, their belt, their shoulder, every place they could reach. The sheer surprise and relief that they felt completely overshadowed the revulsion of being clutched by so many devil fruit-conjured hands. Why she saved them, Nell had no clue. But they were still dangling feet above the stormy sea, and questions like that were going to get them dropped. I pray to the West for her wisdom. Slowly, far too slowly, they were passed hand over hand towards the railing that they could barely see through the lashing rain. They reached up, straining to grasp at anything more substantial than an arm conjured from flowers and seized med magic. They couldn't stop coughing. I pray to the north for her strength. Nell's fingers were brushing at the base of a railing, the smooth wood almost icy and near impossible to grasp. Reaching far enough that they could feel the pull in their back, they were finally able to wrap their hand around it. They laughed through the pain in their lungs. I pray to the Gran. The ship listed again, a wave covering Nell and freezing them to the spot. The hands supporting them all disappeared as they were soaked with seawater, and the only thing keeping Nell from a painful, cold grave was their hand on the railing. A grip that almost failed anyway when they were dropped, and their entire weight fell onto a joint that was nearly ripped from its socket mere moments before. "Phew, help," Nell screamed. Their throat burned with the strain, but the promise of drowning reduced the pain to almost nothing. "Please help." Their fingers were slipping. I pray to." They couldn't bear the words anymore. Life was strange like that. Seconds ago they'd accepted death as inevitable, but a simple delay of arrival, and suddenly they were gripped with so much fear that they felt ready to burst into tears. They tried to reach with their broken arm, but the cast around their hand made grabbing anything impossible. "Help." Their voice was barely audible over the whipping wind. "Help me, please." Nell couldn't help but watch as their grip gave out. I pray to the Grand. They hadn't even fallen an inch before a pair of strong, embodied hands grabbed their arm, halting their descent and finally pulling their shoulder out of its place. They screamed, a white-hot heat burning through their chest and down to their fingertips as they were hauled up and over the railing. They collapsed to their back as they were thrown to the deck. Alive. I pray to the Grand, for her power, Nell panted as they tried not to writhe. The same hand that just saved them gripped Nell by the front of their soaked shirt, and suddenly they were nose to nose with a furious blackleg Sanji. "What the F were you thinking, you dumbass?" he screamed. "Are you trying to get yourself killed?" Nell, of course, coughed in his face. He let them go in an instant, and they rolled inelegantly to support themselves on their aching, casted arm as they hacked and sputtered. The water burned and itched their throat as it forced its way out, but by the end of their fit, they could breathe again. Sort of. Their other arm was useless, dangling at their side, as limp as the soaked braid stuck to their face. They were well and truly defenseless. Before Nell had even fully regained their breath, Sanji scruffed them like a kitten, one hand clenched in their collar, the other at the small of their back. He pulled them to their feet and then some before shoving them towards the infirmary door, his fists pushing them forward. In that moment, they remembered what they were even still on the deck for. Wait, Nell called, hoping to be heard over the wind and praying that Sanji would even listen to them. "I need to talk to Cat Burglar." "The F are you talking about?" His grip loosened. Nell pulled away and clutched their arm to their chest to keep it from moving and sending waves of agony down their spine. I know where we are," they managed. "If we go the wrong way, you'll run aground. Or worse." Sanji stared at them for a long moment, his visible eye squinting in concentration or maybe suspicion. "You're sure?" Nell nodded. He huffed, aggrieved. Fine. See if I care if you don't make it out of the storm. Come on." He grabbed them by the thankfully not dislocated shoulder and started dragging them down the stairs and across the ridiculous lawn. In Nell and Sanji's sprint across the ship, all Nell focused on was not passing out as their shoulder was jostled. Around them, the rest of the crew was scurrying to posts that Nell could vaguely recognize as useful in storms, on rigging, up the mast, tying things back and battening down hatches. To their shock, however, they could see Strawhat in the fray. Not giving orders but receiving them. Not for the first, or the last time, Nell wondered just what kind of ship they'd been pulled onto. Sanji near threw them up the stairs onto the walkway below the bow of the ship before jumping up himself in 2 long strides. Hauling them up from where they landed, attempting to breathe through the pain, he half-carried them the rest of the way to the helm, where Knight and Cat Burglar were huddled together, studying the horizon and speaking in tones far too low to hear over the storm. "Miss Nami." Sanji shouted and steadied Nell where they swayed. "Marine wants to talk to you. Says it's important." Cat Burglar looked up with anger in her eyes. "The hell do you mean?" "Sanji, sails." She jabbed at him and pointed to the main mast still flapping sail. "Yes, ma'am," Sanji said. "Jimbei, make sure this one doesn't try to drown again." He pushed Nell forward before leaping off into the storm, making them stumble into the wide, cold hand of Night of the Sea. His palm was huge as it laid on Nell's good shoulder and spanned across half their back. If Nell had the energy, they would have shivered at the blatant threat. As it was, all they could manage was a sigh. Cat Burglar didn't even turn to face them as she continued to check their heading. A glance down at the compass confirmed Nell's worst fear. They were heading north. "You can't go north, ma'am," they said. "You'll run aground." "What are you talking about, Marine?" She snipped, the rain lashing her long hair into her face. "I'm the DMN navigator, I take the ship where it needs to go." I know, I apologize for my forwardness. Nell fell back into marine propriety as easy as breathing. But I recognized where we were before the storm started. She paused in her considerations to look at them fully. So? Thank the seas, she was taking them seriously. So, about 4 clicks north of here is a massive marine trap, Nell said, as loud as they could without shouting. The ringing in their ears was getting worse. A man-made barrier reef about 20 clicks long made to scuttle any ship that sails over it. You hit it and your ship's done for. How do you know it's there? There's a spire that marks its position. One at either end for merchant ships to spot so they don't hit it. I saw the western one right as the rain started. All right, she said, looking down her nose at Nell despite them being a solid head taller. The ship jostled again and Nell was unhappy to realize that while Cat Burglar barely flinched, the only thing keeping them on 2 feet was Knight's hand still on their shoulder. And why should I believe you? Shouldn't you want pirate ships to get scuttled? Nell groaned, the pain and fear and cold making them far less polite than they ought to have been. Sure, maybe. That is, if I wasn't on the ship. Seas DMN it, not every marine is as stupidly heroic as Garp the FING fist. She crossed her arms and canted her hip, looking Nell up and down. They wished they looked a little less like something the cat dragged in, but they held no false ideas. They'd nearly fallen off the side of the ship. They were sure they looked like a drowned rat at best. So then what do you advise, Marine? The title was obviously meant as an insult and Nell ground their teeth. Go west-southwest. Find the western spire and skirt around the backside of it. The reef follows a curve so that it's pointed more south the further east you go. The only way to avoid it is to navigate by both spires or be north from the beginning. And it's too far south to avoid the calm belt. A beat of silence followed in which Nell was moderately concerned they'd be thrown into the storm for their impudence and extremely concerned that Cat Burglar would ignore them completely and doom the entire ship to drowning, Nell, Usopp, and Chopper included. Nami? Knight's deep, rumbling voice made Nell jump. They'd almost forgotten he was even there, beyond embarrassing since his hand was still on them. What do you think? Cat Burglar sighed loud enough that Nell could hear it over the pound of rain on the deck. She pinched her nose and said, all right, fine. Jimbei, change course. She turned to the railing and raised her voice to a veritable scream. Hey idiots, we're reversing direction. Brace for the tilt. A chorus of ice followed her words and Nell took a moment to marvel at the sheer coherence of the crew. Everybody that Nell could see changed direction seamlessly, like they'd been expecting the warning. Frankie. Khmer. Cyborg peeled off from the group to trot for the bow. As Nell was wondering why Cat Burglar could need their carpenter, the hand on their shoulder disappeared. They swayed immediately and were mortified to realize just how much they'd been relying on Knight's sturdy bulk behind them to keep steady. They tried to catch their footing but only succeeded in falling into Cat Burglar, who huffed and puffed in outrage, living up to her namesake. Sheet. I'm sorry, Nell tried, but the instant they attempted to throw their arms out to steady themselves, they were reminded of the dislocated shoulder that so hobbled them on the sprint up. What the hell? Get off me! She shouted and pushed them back. They stumbled, their thighs bumping into the railing behind them and only just keeping from going but over teakettle over it. Where are your DMNC legs, Marine? Back with my 2 working arms, probably, they snipped back and immediately regretted it. Cat Burglar gave them a considering look, which was something that they never wanted to be subject to. Of the whole crew, she and Nico Robin were the ones most likely to F them up subtly. The rest of them were terrifying, of course, but at least they'd just beat their butt into the ground. No subterfuge necessary. I'm sorry, I didn't. Sanji said again. Don't let you drown again, she said, keeping her footing as the deck yawned under their feet with an ease that Nell couldn't help but envy. Their feet started to slip and an ice-cold terror gripped their throat, far more immediate and direct than any threat that Cat Burglar posed. Oh, sheet. They tried grabbing at the railing and failed miserably. I pray to the mother seas. Frankie, Cat Burglar called. It barely broke through Nell's mounting panic. Get the Marine out of here. They're in my way. You got it, sis. Cyborg's voice sounded from right FING behind them and it only took a second for Nell to realize what Cat Burglar was ordering him to do. Wait, please. They begged, their marine pride gone in the face of being tossed into the abyss that was the new world in storm. They'd hoped that helping the crew would get them some leeway, some trust. But apparently they'd overstayed their welcome. Please, any breath they'd regained was knocked out of them as 2 massive, mechanical hands wrapped themselves around Nell's torso, pinning their arms to their side and sending a jolt of pure agony running through their entire body. They were picked up easily by those hands and pulled over the railing that they'd been leaning against, which further strained their already worn-thin mind. He was behind you, Nell thought. And he's huge. Why wouldn't he just drag you down to him? There we go, Marine bro, Cyborg said, his voice eerily chipper as he carried Nell to their doom. The hands that held them may as well have been steel bands with how little they were able to shift them. But, if they were being honest with themselves, which was easier when imminent death was approaching, they would not have been able to fight him on their best day. They were far too weak. And they'd never get stronger. The pain was preventing them from breathing more than little, rapid gasps, making speaking impossible. But still they closed their eyes, unwilling to see their death approach. And they prayed. I pray to the Mother Seas for mercy, for this soul is to return to their creators. I pray to the Mother Seas for guidance, for this soul to find their way beyond. I pray to the Mother Seas for compassion, for... Cyborg shifted the hands holding them and they couldn't hold back a broken scream. Nell's eyes shot open, but instead of the churning ocean they'd expected to see, what filled their vision was a closed door. DMN, Marine bro, you okay? He actually sounded concerned. Concerned. Where in the 5 FINGCs did he get the right to be concerned about them? Put me down, Nell screeched, reaching volumes they didn't think possible. They were tired of being pulled and pushed and shoved and carried. They were tired of the constant reminders of just how DMN weak and helpless they were. They were tired of being scared. Alright, just gimme a sec, geez, Cyborg said, nothing more than mildly surprised at their seething rage. The fact that they weren't being dangled over the railing gave them a painful kind of hope that they'd deeply misconstrued what cat burglars, get the Marine out of here, meant, and it made them far too bold. They started kicking, trying to catch whatever they could with their heel if it meant that they would stop being toted around like a FING purse dog. Whoa, watch it. If you don't put me down in the next 5 FING seconds, I'm going to shoot your D off. Nell screamed over the wind that Cyborg didn't even seem to notice. I swear to the seas. F-. He shifted his grip again and their arms were let go, leaving their dislocated shoulder to hang and send bolts of pain lancing up their neck with every sway. Cyborg. FING. Laughed. Nell howled with outrage and flailed, doing no favors for the pain that they were in. They knew they'd be mortified of their actions later, providing they survived, but right then, they were being laughed at by a pirate and they couldn't stand it anymore. You motherfucker, put me down. Yeah, I gotcha the first time, Cyborg continued, chuckling. He opened the door in front of them, revealing a normal-looking bunk room with swinging hammocks and lockers and a seized med kotatsu in the middle of it all. Abruptly, Nell was dropped to their feet and the tiny fall made them stumble forward enough that they were in the room. The wind and rain ceased all at once. You'll be safe in here until the storm's done. And I'd super appreciate if you didn't shoot my D off. Cyborg guffawed before shutting the door and leaving them in the dim light of the cabin. It was like a switch had been flipped. The panic and chaos and cold that they'd been steeped in since that wave washed them away drained like a lanced abscess as they stood, hurt but alive, in the warm air of the cabin. The creaking wood and pounding waves were muffled and almost soothing and Nell slumped against the wall, unable to keep steady after such an ordeal. Even the wood behind them felt a little warm, though that may have been because they were hypothermic. Slowly, mindful of their arm as they were finally able to hold it steady against their chest, they slid down to sit. They didn't even attempt to move to any of the chairs or bunks they could see gently swaying. They didn't trust themselves to keep steady enough to get in without injuring themselves further. Nell sagged, their head knocking the wall as they lost all of the power that had brought them to try and fight against an 8-foot-tall, mostly metal man that carried their nearly 7-foot self with the ease that most people would hold a child. Nell inhaled. And exhaled. I pray to the Mother Seas for compassion, for this soul, their voice hitched. For this soul to find peace in the arms of the world. Hunching into themselves as much as they could, Nell buried their face in their knees and cried. An unknown amount of time later, long enough that Nell had started to dry and shiver from the chill that had seeped into their bones, the door to the bunk room opened. They struggled for a moment before lifting their head to see who was entering before realizing they overshot their look, as the person in the doorway was none other than Dr. Chopper. Thank the seas. He looked at them with an amount of relief that they didn't know how to process past the reaffirmed knowledge that the kid was far too nice to be a pirate. Oh my gosh, Nell. Chopper said, his voice biting into their ringing eardrums. Are you alright? Sanji told me you almost fell overboard. He ran up to them and Nell uncurled a little, allowing him better access for a post-traumatic exam. They'd been in accidents before, they knew the drill. What hurts? My arm, sir, Nell said, voice raspy from abuse. He went for the broken one, with the soaked, nearly useless cast. No, the other one. The other. I think my shoulder's dislocated. What? Nell winced. How? His hooves were absurdly gentle as he poked and prodded their shoulder. The whole falling overboard thing, they said and almost laughed. It felt ridiculous to explain to him, a devil fruit user, that they were almost laid low by a DMN wave when they had 2 working legs and no weakness to the stuff other than an apparent inability to notice when it was rushing at them. Murder on the joints. They may have been slightly delirious. Chopper glared at them. It was adorable. You dislocated your shoulder and didn't immediately get me? Do you know that every minute it stays out, it makes it harder to put back in? Nell tried to shrug and realized very quickly what a bad idea it was. There was a storm. You were busy. You bstrd, he grumbled, feeling for the protruding bone of their shoulder. Just as bad as the rest of the DMN crew. Come on, let's go to the infirmary. He shifted into the tall man-beast form and reached for their waist. Don't. Nell yelped, embarrassingly high-pitched as they pushed themselves into the wall to get away from the grasping hands. Chopper stopped, his face going from annoyed to concerned as he looked at them. He shifted back to the small shape he seemed to prefer and put a hoof on Nell's knee. What's wrong? It's just me. He was right. It was just him. Just Chopper, the kindest one on the ship. The one that seemed to genuinely care about them. The pirate that Nell, against their better judgment, actually liked. Did something happen? Are you hurt anywhere else? No, they coughed, half because they needed to and half to delay talking. I'm all right. I can walk by myself. His mouth twisted with suspicion and for a quick moment, Nell was worried that he thought they were hiding something dangerous. Then he took another look at their shoulder and stepped back. All right, but only if you promise to keep your arm steady. I don't like how deformed it is. Deal, Nell said. I'd shake your hand, but... He didn't take their attempt at levity well, grimacing while Nell leveraged themselves up to standing. Chopper shifted back to the tall, more useful-looking form and his hands hovered around them without making contact. Nell appreciated the restraint more than he'd ever know. Nell and Chopper made their way out to the deck and Nell almost expected it to still be in chaos. But instead, what they saw was a bright orange-red sunset in a nearly cloudless sky and what they felt was humid, almost warm air that shocked their still frigid skin. The rest of the crew that they could see were milling slowly around the deck. To their shock, Nell could even see Demon Hunter sat at the base of the main mast, with Strawhat sprawled out over his legs. They were both snoring. Nell made it back to the infirmary in a daze, barely feeling the climb up the stairs. Chopper held the door open for them. Why in the world is this kid a pirate? They'd barely taken 2 steps into the infirmary before they were nearly tackled to the floor. Only Chopper's hand behind their back kept them steady as they swore, ready to shove off whoever it was agitating their finally less painful arm. What the? Nell. Oh my god, holy shit, you're alive, Usopp bawled, tears streaming down his face as he clutched them with a strength he didn't know how to control. I'm so sorry. I didn't know what to do. I saw you get swept away but Big Chopper wouldn't let me leave and even if I did I couldn't do anything. Whoa, hey, Usopp, Chop tried to soothe, pushing him back as Nell focused on breathing through the pain. He let go of them with a lot of reluctance, sniffling through the rest of his upset. It's okay. Luffy wasn't gonna let anything happen to them. Really? Usopp asked, scrubbing his face and under his nose, leaving a gross streak of tears and snot across his shirt sleeve. Nell barely registered it, too focused on what Chopper had just said. Luffy wasn't going to let anything happen to them. That had to have been something that Chopper said to appease Usopp. Right? And besides, Straw Hat had no hand in keeping them from going overboard, that was all Sanji and Nico Robin. And Cat Burglar and Knight and Cyborg, their mind unhelpfully reminded them. Half the crew helped keep you alive in that storm. They didn't have to. Really, Chopper assured. They're just a little injured and I can help that easy. You're alright, Nell? Usopp asked, looking at Nell with big, watery eyes. They knew that they absolutely should not have been so endeared to the man who, in a couple days' time, would be back to his old, marine-hating pirate self. But, DMN. He just cared about them too much. It made it very hard to stay impartial. I'm alright, Nell said, patting his shoulder with the ruined cast. Banged up, but I'm not keeling over anytime soon. Chopper shooed Usopp back gently as he herded Nell to their bed. Wildly, inexplicably, they actually believed that. There was no seized med reason for the crew to have fought that hard to keep them alive. They'd already given Nico Robin plenty of information and it wasn't like they were the only one that Usopp would listen to. No matter what Sanji said about helping Usopp, Nell knew better. They'd ran out of their usefulness the instant that Usopp woke up and started talking to his crew. So why save them? Was Nell truly a hostage? Was that the play they were going for? If so, the crew were doing a very poor job at actually threatening anybody for money or information in exchange for their safe return. Nell was no expert, but they figured that if they were being used as leverage, the person being threatened would probably want to know they were alive and there had been no requirements of them to talk or take a picture or anything. Why am I still alive? So the first thing I need to do is reset your shoulder, Chopper said as Nell sat, cutting through their introspection. Do you want pain medication? Nell shook their head immediately. No way were they risking being high on meds and letting a secret slip. They were tired, not an idiot. Suddenly, they felt two sets of hands on them and startled. Looking down, they expected more disembodied arms growing out of their bed or the wall or their stomach, but instead saw Usopp, face puffy with crying, holding their good, bad, hand and grimacing. Nell squeezed back as much as they could and inhaled deep to brace. If you're sure. On three, Chopper said, gripping them by the wrist and the elbow. Nell appreciated that he didn't delay or try to convince them otherwise. He was just down to business. 1, 2, 3. He started pulling an F-dash. They were wrong, they were so wrong. They should have gone for the pain meds, they should have risked being a traitor, the pain was unbearable. Phoo, Nell tried to swear but couldn't get enough breath to even make a full word. Maybe they were really wrong and Chopper wasn't actually kind or sweet or caring. Maybe he was ripping their arm out of its seized med socket and was going to make sure that the minor threat that Nell could pose to the crew never manifested. It's okay, you're almost there, Usopp babbled, barely making sense to Nell's pain-addled mind. Nell groaned as they felt their bones scraping together, sending lancing spears of pure heat radiating down their chest and into the DMN heart. They couldn't stand it, they couldn't st. Pop. All at once, the pain was gone. They slumped forward, actually grateful for the grasping hands keeping them from falling off the bed onto their face. Slow and gentle, Chopper rotated their shoulder as Usopp chattered some frantic story about an island of dinosaurs and giants. Nell exhaled in a huff and reveled in the low, muscular ache that replaced the branding hot pain. How do you feel? Chopper asked, voice low and almost contrite. He felt around the joint, big fingers pressing into the sore muscle. Nell laughed once, humorless. Exhausted. Are you in any pain? He set Nell's arm into their lap and waited. Just achy. It's much better. They looked up at him and pushed away the last dregs of their marine sensibility. Thank you, Chopper. You're a good doctor. With a barely there whoosh of air, Chopper shifted to his small, cute form and clopped onto his hooves with an adorable wiggle. Don't lie to me, BSTRD, he said, walking towards the tall cabinet in the back of the room. Usopp's hand in Nell's tightened briefly before loosening as Chopper moved away. Whoa, Usopp breathed. Was that part of his power? Nell finished. Usopp nodded. Yeah, that's pretty basic for Zoans. It's amazing. Huh. Nell wasn't expecting that. Last they saw him, Usopp was still utterly terrified of Chopper. Something must have happened at his checkup that softened him towards the little deer. Nell couldn't lie, it was a welcome change. Seeing Chopper so dejected when Usopp flinched from him hurt even them. Yeah, it is pretty cool, Nell said. They'd spent enough time in the Grand Line, seen enough powers, Zoan, Paramecia, and even Logia, that most of them felt, not common, but not excessively special. The wonder in Usopp's eyes reminded them of their first time seeing a devil fruit in action, a demonstration by the then Admiral Akiji. He'd frozen the lake that the base Nell was training at was situated around. It was the middle of August on a summer island. The ice was there until November and the cadets would spend their free time daring each other to jump in the melted areas. You okay? Usopp asked, jolting them out of their mind once again. Nell shook their head to dislodge the old memories. Fine. Just tired. I'll let you rest soon, Chopper said, appearing back at their side with an armful of splinting supplies. I just want to redo your cast and finish your exam. Whatever you need, they said, giving their other arm to him easily. Hey, Usopp stuttered, sitting down on the bed next to Nell. You ever heard the story about the Dragon Emperor and his army of beasts? Before waiting for either Nell or Chopper to answer, Usopp launched into a tale about floating islands and evil animals and fire-breathing dragons that were bested by a giant warrior that came down from the heavens. Nell was absolutely certain they'd heard the story somewhere before, but instead of trying to figure it out, they just let themselves slip into an almost meditative state. They were a kind of exhausted that only surfaced from the come down after mortal terror, so the sound of Usopp's voice rising and falling with his story was about as calming as a lullaby. Chopper was in front of them still, ooing and ahing at the right moments as he recast Nell's arm. The only time they felt a sliver of pain was when he had to shift their wrist when putting on the new plaster, and even then it was barely a wince. Chopper was, despite all evidence to the Marines or public, just a good doctor. As Usopp's story was coming to a close and Chopper was putting the finishing wrap on their cast, a knock came to the door. Nell almost groaned. They'd been looking forward to finally going to sleep. It's me, Sanji called. I have snacks. Usopp looked to Nell for some reason, eyes wild with nerves. They nodded. They could delay sleep for food. Come in, Usopp answered. Sanji walked in backwards, his hands occupied by 2 trays piled high with plates of delicious-looking snacks that made Nell's stomach growl just by looking. Little sandwiches, cut fruit, sliced cheese, and cured meat were just the start of it. It was like he emptied out the fridge to make finger foods for his crew. If Nell didn't know any better, they'd think that the notorious blackleg Sanji was a stress cooker. But that couldn't be right. Here, he said, still gruff. That storm was shitty. Eat, get some energy back up. He shifted a little, swaying foot to steel-toed foot, as he set some of the food up on every available surface. Holy sheet, blackleg Sanji was a stress cooker. Thanks Sanji, Chopper said. He hugged Sanji around the knees, who gave him a pet between the antlers. Don't let it go to waste, alright? And Nell? He pointed at them. Nell couldn't find the energy to even be surprised, let alone scared. Yes? Miss Nami wanted me to deliver a message. She says, thanks for the tip. Guess you made a good impression. That caught Nell's attention. Now don't be pitching your gangly butt over any more railings, you hear me? I've got enough to worry about with 4 hammers in this crew. I hear you, Nell said, caught off guard. Between cat burglars thanks and Sanji's what? Concern? For them? Nell was left reeling. Just one thing sunk into their overdrawn mind. They owed him something. And thank you, Sanji. They stood, hands at their side, and gave him a proper bow. For saving my life. If Nice could see you now? They pushed the thought away. If Nice could see them now, they never would have been kidnapped. If they nearly went overboard on his ship, they would have been punished for their failure, if they were saved at all. Nice could go F himself. Sanji waved them off, but if they weren't mistaken, there was a little smile on his face. Don't make a habit of it, all right? I will try, they said, straightening. Your concern is appreciated. Yeah, whatever, he griped, gathering the extra food to distribute to the rest of his crew. Eat, all of you shitheads. I don't want to come back to wasted food, hear me? Chopper giggled. We hear you, Sanji. Sanji left with nothing more than a roll of his eye and a mumbled complaint about goddamn idiots. Nell wasn't sure who exactly he was talking about, but had a feeling it at least included them. Nell collapsed back onto the bed, legs DMN near giving out under them. Usopp yelped and moved to try to catch them but aborted the attempt quick as he grabbed the still damp cast. Are you okay? Usopp asked. Nell nodded, done with talking for the day. Their tongue felt like cotton in their mouth and all they wanted to do was fill the hole in their belly and lay down. Did the cook save you? From the wave? Chopper cut in. Nell almost went overboard. Sanji and Robin caught them. He was milling around the room, expertly dodging the food piled everywhere to grab a couple more exam tools. Seemed as though their appointment wasn't done. Wow, Usopp breathed. That's incredible. Nell hummed. They had to agree, though they were probably biased. Usopp stood, going towards the piles of food and picked something that looked like an onigiri if it was shallow fried. With all the food around them, Nell's stomach was growling audibly and they were hoping that Chopper would give them the go-ahead to eat. But they knew better than to start eating before their doctor gave the okay. Usopp was ramping back up into his story about evil dragon emperors and Nell had inadvertently been sked in as Chopper tapped and felt and moved their joints. He was just getting to the warrior giant and his pet lightning bolt when another knock came on the door. Or, more like, 2 knocks. The first was a sedate, light rap of the knuckles whereas the second sounded more like whoever was on the other side was ready to beat the door down. Usopp. Straw Hat called. Usopp, Usopp, Usopp. Usopp smiled wide at the sound of Straw Hat's voice. Seize, that was a relief. Nell wasn't sure what would have been demanded of them if Usopp kept taking his cues from Nell and looking at the captain like the walking time bomb that he was. Instead, Usopp looked happy and excited and just the slightest tinge nervous as he opened the door. Loo goof. Usopp was immediately wrapped in an octopus hug of limbs as Straw Hat latched onto him. Nell sighed. They really hoped he didn't pay them any mind. They didn't feel like trying to figure out what he wanted. Usopp. Straw Hat continued to yell, as if he wasn't in the room with them. Robin says there's some kind of meaty shower tonight that we can watch. You should come out. Sanji made snacks. A discreet, rubbery arm stretched out behind Usopp's back to snatch a piece of something from one of the food trays and snapped back to his mouth. Nico Robin, in a much more sensible-looking t-shirt and sleep pants, followed Straw Hat in. It's a meteor shower, Luffy. Falling stars. No meat involved. Straw Hat pouted, looking far more like a petulant child than Nell was comfortable with seeing, let alone coping with. No meat? Sanji made plenty of meat for your snacks. Straw Hat perked up like a dog told that it was going for a walk. All right, that's fine then. He untangled himself from the dazed Usopp and pulled them both to their feet. So, are you gonna come? Usopp's happy expression twisted as he looked back at Nell and Chopper. It looked like he was searching for permission, but from who, Nell didn't know. They kept quiet. It was far more likely that he was making sure with the doctor that it was alright to be out and about after his accident. Chopper nodded. That's fine if you go, Usopp. Just don't do anything crazy. Usopp nodded, but to Nell's surprise, kept looking over at them. Was he looking for their approval? He didn't need that a couple hours ago, when he went out on deck no matter how much Nell protested, and met Soul King, and saw Nell get swept away. Oh shit. He was looking for Nell's approval. Nell liked their lips and swallowed, trying to clear some of the cotton feel from their throat. Ha ahem, they tried and coughed. Have fun. They could feel the burn of Straw Hat's gaze on them and kept their eyes trained on Usopp. Nell could not deal with what was going on in Straw Hat's mind right then. Apparently what he saw in Nell's face reassured him that neither he nor they were in danger, because Usopp broke into a far wider smile. Thanks. I will. Straw Hat crowed with what sounded like glee and latched onto both a tray of food and Usopp's hand, dragging him past Nico Robin and out onto the twilit deck. Nell wanted to slump into the pillows with a hunk of cheese that they could eat like an apple, but Chopper was still feeling around their knees and Nico Robin was lingering in the doorway. They didn't want to disturb Chopper by getting up and bowing again, but they owed it to her. They owed their life to her. Ma'am, they said. She gave them a smile that they could only call indulgent. Yes, little Marine? Nell's nerves barely twanged at the diminutive. They held up a finger to Chopper, who backed up with a question on his lips. Nell stood. You saved my life, they said, falling into another deep bow. Thank you. I am in your debt. She made a little noise and Nell got the strange feeling that they actually surprised her. You are welcome, she said. I couldn't very well let Sanji's new helper go over the railing to sink to the bottom of the ocean and be food for sharks, now could I? You very much could have, ma'am, Nell said, voice quieter than they expected as they straightened. She smiled again and there was something different about it. Usopp likes you, she said. As does Chopper. You've made a good impression, Nell. I hope you continue to. I don't know what I did, they said, a little desperate. They didn't want to say that, but seized they were tired. They needed something, some rule or guideline or anything to cling to. Sanji said help Usopp, which was all well and good, except they didn't know what that meant. You were helpful. And fair. And surprisingly honorable despite your obvious fear, she said. Nell winced. Chopper at their side put a hoof on their knee. It was, somehow, comforting. We were not expecting much in the way of help or fairness from any Marine, never mind a kidnapped one. You have been a pleasant surprise. So, what next? They couldn't hide the waver in their voice. Next, I am going to go stargazing with my captain and crew and you are going to eat and sleep and get some rest. You've had a very eventful day. Nell snorted. Oh, Frankie wanted me to send his apologies. He did not realize you'd hurt your arm and he's sorry for causing you more pain. She paused and seemed to listen to something that Nell couldn't hear, most likely from an ear bloomed somewhere else on the ship. The idea was far less frightening than they'd expected. And he'd like me to say, she giggled, the sound like tinkling bells. That he can make you a gun so that you can shoot his d off, if it makes you feel better. Nell could feel Chopper's glare as they sat heavily. I know, I'm fine. No harm done. Then, I will relay the message and leave you be. Sleep well, Nell the Marine, she said as she went to the door, her hand on the frame. Tomorrow is a new day, surely to be filled with new horrors. The door shut behind her with a low click and the only thing that Nell could hear was the clopping of Chopper's hooves on the wood and swoosh of waves against the hull. They finally gave in, slumping to their side. To lay in the bed. They were still fully clothed, on top of the covers, with their hair crunchy and skin sticky from salt. Their stomach was growling as they were surrounded by food and their legs were still dangling off the edge. No matter how tired they got, they refused to put their dirty boots on the bed. It's been an eventful day, she'd said. Eventful. That was one word for it. If she'd asked Nell, they would have said something like, terrifying, painful, or, bats hit insane. Not the bland little, eventful. But she didn't ask them. No, instead she'd said things like how they were honorable and helpful and sent Nell hurtling down the most confusing slide of conclusions that they'd ever been on. If they didn't know any better, Nell would say that she liked them. That multiple people on the DMN crew liked them. Chopper and his care. Sanji and his gruff concern. Nico Robin and her compliments. Cat Burglar and her thanks. And even Cyborg and his FING sorry. It was making a thought congeal in their mind. An awful, stupid, ridiculous thought. Chopper was at their side with a stethoscope in his ears. The bell of it was cold against their chest where they lifted their shirt for him to access. Take a deep breath for me, please, he said, and if there was anything Nell knew how to do, it was follow orders. The rest of their exam finished with anticlimax as Chopper declared them bruised but healthy. Just don't fall into the ocean anytime soon, okay? They were just grateful he didn't ask about the scars on their back. I'll do my best. And there it was, the tip of the thought that they were fighting against. Why would they have gone to such trouble to save their life, if they were just going to kill them anyway? Nell leveraged himself onto an elbow and watched Chopper putter around, an apple in his hoof that he was absently munching on. Chopper? He looked back at them, surprised and with cheeks full. He almost looked like a tanuki, if not for the antlers. Can I ask you something? It was better to have answers. It was always better to know what was coming. He swallowed. Of course. Oh, Cece really meant that. What's wrong? The words got lost in their throat. Chopper was patient as they found them again. Am I going to survive this? Chopper blinked. Nell shook him and he had to take a moment to reel. They gave it to him, no matter how much they wanted to crawl out of their skin. What the hell are you talking about? I just told you you're healthy. Are you still in pain? Are you sick? He was growing frantic. No, I'm fine, they said, sitting up to try to placate him. If he didn't know, they didn't want to make him find out. What if by questioning their place or upsetting Chopper, it made the crew unhappy with them? What if they were manifesting their own fate? But I need to know. Just what? Nell squeezed their eyes shut and begged the seas that they weren't making a terrible mistake. I am a Marine on an Emperor's ship, Chopper, they said without looking at him. My usefulness has an expiration date and up until now, I had assumed that date would mark my expiration as well. There was a beat of heavy silence. Are you asking if we're gonna kill you when Usopp gets better? Chopper repeated. He sounded utterly horrified. They nodded, opening their eyes. Yes, I am. To Nell's dismay, Chopper began crying. You really though, he hiccuped, tears rolling down his face in fat drops. Nell stood and walked over to try to comfort him, but he backed up from their approach. They stopped, aware of just how much of up they'd committed. They almost expected Straw Hat to burst into the room and kill them on the spot for the crime of making his doctor cry. I'm sorry, I didn't mean. No, Chopper forced, wiping his face roughly and holding up a hoof to get Nell to stop talking. No, Nell. We're not going to kill you. You're nice. You heard Robin, we like you. He hiccuped again as all the strength left Nell's legs and they near collapsed. Chopper shifted in a blink and caught them before they could hit the floor. You tried to help Usopp, even when we were fighting. I just didn't want to kill him, they said in a daze, clutching at the furry arms keeping them upright. Exactly, he said. His hands were beyond gentle as he gathered Nell up and carried them to their bed. You didn't want to kill him, so we don't want to kill you. He laid them down and Nell thought it should have been more disconcerting to have a creature that big looming over them. Why would you even think that? Nell shrugged, their shoulders still sore from the earlier injury. You're pirates. What else were you gonna do? It was like all the thoughts in their mind were replaced by snow, muffling and quiet and impossible to differentiate one flake from another. Chopper's lip wobbled again. We're pirates because we're free. Nell smiled, kicking off their boots with some difficulty. That's a nice thing to be, they said. I don't think I've ever been truly free. They didn't know exactly what they were saying. That's so sad. They shrugged again, dropping their boots so that they thudded onto the wood. I'm a Marine. Property of the world government. His face hardened, dismay sharpening into something else that Nell's addled mind couldn't place. That's awful. Nell giggled and then stopped themselves. If they started laughing, they were sure they wouldn't be able to stop. The crew liked them. They didn't want to kill them. If Nell played their cards very right, they might actually survive. You do believe me, right? Chopper asked, wringing his giant hands. Nell patted his arm. I believe you, Doctor, they said, fighting another laugh. They could feel the smile pulling at their cheeks. You're a good kid, you know that? The painful look on his face swapped to a front. I'm a pirate. And 17. Yeah, well, I'm 27, they said, head sinking into the pillow. It was like every ounce of stress and fear that had been keeping them functioning left in one fell swoop. Just a couple little words. Just one little doctor. And I apparently might make it to 28. Chopper sniffed and more tears glistened at the edges of his eyes. He tucked Nell in, he tucked them in, and reached over to the light switch. I think you need some sleep, he said, and the room fell into a deep, cool darkness that made Nell think they already closed their eyes. We can talk about this more later. He walked away, the big form retreating in the dim light. And leaving Nell to their bed and the warmth and the dark. For a moment, they considered whether or not they had actually died. That they were on their way to the mothers, skating on a stream of maybes and almosts as their soul flowed beyond. Then they tried to shift and their stiffened shoulder sent an ache that they could feel in their jaw and they knew that they were still alive. They were still alive. Turning to their side, Nell spotted Chopper at his desk and heard the rustle of some food or other being played with. Chopper, they said, and his head whipped up. His pupils glowed in the darkness. Thank you. Go to sleep, Nell. Nell closed their eyes and ignored the growl of their stomach and the scream in the back of their mind. Yes, sir. Finally, an order they were happy to obey.
Okay, sadly the chapter is over. And if you enjoyed the video, just leave a like and subscribe with post notification. So when the next chapter is ready, you will be notified. Okay, see you in the next video. Bye.